Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution, and we do have a World War III alert. We got a World War III alert. It is good versus evil. And President Putin refuses to kneel before NATO, so that means it must be war. It is good versus evil. Let's get right into this revolutionary news update.
Over the past few days, Trump and his team have begun making rather harsh statements about the Ukrainian conflict. In particular, many experts and analysts have noticed that Trump has begun to declare that he will achieve peace in Ukraine on his own terms. According to him, if Russia refuses to make peace on Washington's terms, the United States will force Moscow to do it anyway. Against this backdrop, a few hours ago, an authoritative American expert and professor in the political science department at the University of Chicago, John Mearsheimer, said that U.S. citizens welcome the desire of the 47th U.S. President Donald Trump to end the war in Ukraine. However, many in the United States do not understand how Donald Trump intends to do this. Many Americans are confident that the newly elected U.S. president will not be able to impose Washington's conditions on Russia and force the Kremlin to sign agreements that will not fully meet Moscow's interests. John Mearsheimer noted that still the current U.S. President Joe Biden, with the help of all European countries and the North Atlantic Alliance, failed to force Russia to accept the West's conditions. According to him, Donald Trump may also be defeated as his predecessors if he adheres to the same policy towards Russia. The American expert noted that Donald Trump, like a real businessman, is used to threatening his opponents. However, such a policy is useless regarding a country like Russia. Moreover, the Russian army continues to win numerous victories on the battlefield. Almost every week, war correspondents report on new cities and towns that Russian troops have taken control of. In addition, despite harsh sanctions from the West, Russian engineers continue to surprise the world with new types of weapons. In particular, the latest hypersonic ballistic missile Orshnik, which Russia demonstrated on November 21, really turned out to be a super weapon, capable of changing the course of any war. The capabilities of this unique missile turned out to be so impressive that even Ukrainian and Western propagandists, in their articles, could not downplay the importance of this latest Russian weapon. Moreover, it seems that Western and Ukrainian politicians are still in a state of shock after they saw the impressive capabilities of this latest hypersonic ballistic missile. The fact is that Ukrainian deputies still refuse to return to the government quarters of Kiev due to fears that Russia will again use its latest hypersonic ballistic missile Orshnik, but this time against the Ukrainian capital. In this regard, the building of the Ukrainian parliament has been empty for more than 2 weeks.
They scared.
Many Western diplomats were also scared of repeated strikes by the latest Russian missile. Insiders in Kiev confirmed that over the past week, about 50 employees of Western embassies fled Ukraine. The head of the Kiev regime, Vladimir Zelensky, also began to feel uncomfortable in the capital of Ukraine. It is reported that Vladimir Zelensky is constantly in an underground bunker and comes out only when another delegation of NATO countries arrives in Kiev. The head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, General Kirill Budanov, and the chairman of the Security Service of Ukraine, General Vasily Malyuk, also moved to underground bunkers. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation also added oil to the fire, further increasing the fear of representatives of the Kiev regime. In particular, in the last 20 days alone, the Russian military department has twice closed the airspace over the Kapustin Yar missile range, in the Astrakhan region. All this indicates that the Russians continue to test and improve their latest missiles in real combat conditions. Moreover, after the head of Roscosmos, Yuri Borisov, officially announced that his corporation's engineers had begun working on increasing the power of the hypersonic ballistic missile Orshnik, sources in the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation declared that preparations were underway for testing of the latest Russian rocket at the Novaya Zemlya test site. Against this backdrop, many Western experts expressed confidence that continuing to talk to Russia from a position of strength and forcing Moscow to accept the conditions of the West is meaningless and even dangerous. The fact that Russia will not agree to make concessions and accept the conditions of the West regarding the Ukrainian issue was also reported by Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia Sergei Ryabkov. In particular, during an interview with American journalists from CNN, the senior Russian diplomat officially stated that Moscow would achieve all its goals in this special military operation. At the same time, he noted that Russia is ready to engage in dialogue with the Trump administration regarding Ukraine and put an end to this conflict, but on condition that the West lifts all sanctions against Russia, recognizes the territories liberated by the Russian army as part of the Russian Federation, and prohibits Ukraine from joining NATO.
Yeah.
The Russian diplomat also added that Moscow used the latest hypersonic ballistic missile Orshnik in Ukraine for a reason. According to him, it was a demonstration that Russia was ready to defend its interests by any means available. By the way, American journalists noticed that after a call from the chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, General Valery Gerasimov, to his American counterpart, the 21st chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles Brown, the Ukrainian army stopped firing Western long-range missiles deep into Russian territory. It is reported that on November 27, Valery Gerasimov and Charles Brown held a telephone conversation, where the Russian general told his American counterpart about the combat capabilities of the latest hypersonic ballistic missile Orshnik. The Russian general also warned of the deplorable consequences that will certainly appear if Ukraine continues to fire Western missiles deep into Russian territory. Journalists from the New York Times and ABC News noticed that after this phone call from the Russian general, the Ukrainian army completely stopped launching U.S. ATACMS ballistic missiles deep inside Russia. American journalists stressed that the United States took the threats of the Russian general and the combat capabilities of the latest Russian hypersonic ballistic missile Orshnik seriously, as a result of which Washington banned the Ukrainian army from firing Western long-range missiles deep into Russian territory. Thus, it can be stated that with the help of the world's most powerful hypersonic ballistic missile Orshnik, Vladimir Putin achieved his goal and forced the United States to back down.
The Syrian Air Force carried out a powerful airstrike at 6:54 p.m., hitting a terrorist convoy as it advanced in Talbise, north of the Homs countryside, today on December 6, 2024. Syrian army forces entered Homs with the support of Russian helicopters, attacking terrorist cells released by Turkey, and have now entered the city of Talbise after Hama fell, triggering an attack on Homs by sleeping terrorist groups before the ceasefire in Lebanon. The video shows Russian Ka-52 Alligator helicopter and Mi-8 helicopter are seen releasing their powerful flares towards the convoy on the streets, which are flanked by city buildings. One moment from the terrorists' camera frames shows a very strong explosion heard as the airstrike hits a position near them. Events in Syria are moving very fast right now. This morning, the terrorist group led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham HTS has been carrying out aggression against the legitimate Syrian government forces since November 27, and claims to have now entered the city of Talbise, 10 kilometers from the city of Homs. The fall of Hama, which forced the population to flee amidst increasing violence and instability due to their presence, has now triggered an attack on Homs. Footage documents the presence of their convoys passing through Rostan and Talbise, which are planned to go further south along the highway to Homs, and it is clear that this will bring danger to innocent civilians, women and children. Today, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who mobilized HTS terrorists under Islamic symbols, announced and began to speak out about the dirty war on Syria. As the city of Homs prepares to defend itself from HTS gangs, Erdogan expects HTS to reach Damascus. If Homs falls, HTS is less than 25 kilometers from Damascus, which separates Syrian coast from the ports of Tartus and Latakia, and furthermore to Golan border. However, on the same day, it was reported that Syrian Arab Army withdrew from positions along Euphrates River, deploying armored units to reinforce Homs, the country's third largest city after Aleppo. Syrian Defense Ministry confirmed that there is no truth in media reports about the withdrawal of troops from Homs. The Defense Ministry confirmed that Syrian Arab Army is present in Homs and its surrounding areas, and is deployed in a fixed and solid defense line of great strength, equipped with various types of equipment and weapons, and ready to repel any attack.
Ve Humus hedef tabii Şam. Muhaliflerin bu yürüyüşü şu an itibariyle devam ediyor. Biz de bunu gerek istihbarat gerekse bütün medyadan takibini yapıyoruz. Tabii temennimiz kazasız belasız bir şekilde Suriye'deki bu yürüyüş devam etsin diyeceğim. Ama terör örgütleriyle birlikte oradaki bu direniş devam ederken bizim de hatırlarsanız Esed'e bir çağrımız olmuştu. Gel görüşelim ve Suriye'nin geleceğini birlikte belirleyelim, tayin edelim demiştik. Ne yazık ki tabii Esad'dan bu işe olumlu bir cevap. Şu an itibariyle tabii İdlib, Hama ve Humus hedef tabii Şam. Muhaliflerin bu yürüyüşü şu an itibariyle devam ediyor. Biz de bunu gerek istihbarat gerekse bütün medyadan takibini yapıyoruz. Tabii temennimiz kazasız belasız bir şekilde Suriye'deki bu yürüyüş devam etsin diyeceğim. Ama terör örgütleriyle birlikte oradaki bu direniş devam ederken bizim de hatırlarsanız Esed'e bir çağrımız olmuştu. Gel, görüşelim ve Suriye'nin geleceğini birlikte belirleyelim, tayin edelim demiştik. Ne yazık ki tabii Esad'dan bu işe olumlu bir cevap.
The recent reports of a potential Israel Defense Forces (IDF) deployment in Syria to assist with logistics and intelligence for ongoing terrorist offensives have raised significant concerns about the broader implications of such an involvement. Allegedly working in coordination with the Turkish intelligence service, this operation appears aimed at further destabilizing Syria and distracting Iranian and Russian forces aligned with the Assad government. While details remain scarce and the authenticity of these claims is not yet verified, the alleged move represents a significant escalation by Israel, further complicating the region's already volatile dynamics. Please like and share this video to help us out with the algorithm. Historically, Israel has conducted airstrikes on Syrian military assets, claiming these actions are defensive measures against groups like Hezbollah and Iranian-backed militias operating near its borders. However, the intensification of these strikes coinciding with the advance of terrorist and rebel groups suggests a deeper strategy may be at play. Critics argue that these airstrikes might not just be about self-defense, but could serve to facilitate the rapid progress of rebel forces by weakening Syrian government defenses. If true, this alignment between IDF actions and rebel advancements could signal a deliberate effort to shape the Syrian battlefield. Colonel Douglas McGregor, a retired U.S. Army veteran and CEO of Our Country, Our Choice, offered a sharp critique of these developments during an interview on Judging Freedom with Judge Andrew Napolitano. McGregor argued that the chaos engulfing the Middle East and parts of Asia is a direct result of covert operations led by the CIA, Mossad, and other Western intelligence agencies. He claimed these agencies aim to destabilize the region to install regimes amenable to Western and Israeli interests. According to McGregor, this pattern of engineered crises is primarily about control and ensuring Israel's regional hegemony. One of McGregor's key points was the strategic threat posed by Bashar al-Assad's government to Israel's long-term objectives. Assad's unwavering support for the Palestinian cause and his alignment with the so-called Axis of Resistance, comprising Iran, Hezbollah, and other anti-Israel forces, make his regime a significant obstacle. Removing Assad, McGregor argued, would effectively dismantle one of the last bastions of opposition to Israeli and Western influence in the region, paving the way for further consolidation of power.
I think that's over now. Whether or not they're doing it at the moment, I don't know. But clearly the Mossad, the CIA, and the Turkish intelligence forces, those three have worked to bring about this atrocious outcome. And this is atrocious. These Islamists are as bad, if not worse, than ISIS. And after all, they are, frankly, the offspring of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra. These organizations are radical Islamists. The sort of thing that the Iranians worked with us to destroy, frankly, when we were fighting ISIS.
How can the American intelligence community justify funding, supporting, and supplying a group like this? And number two, What are 1,000 American troops in uniform, boots on the ground, doing there?
Well, the answer to the first question is we've done this before many times in many places. You can go back to the Contras in Nicaragua. You can look at various entities that we've supported in the Philippines or Vietnam over time. We have a habit of repurposing people that were previously hostile to us in an attempt to harm someone else who opposes us. This is part of the problem with the CIA. I mean, the CIA is regarded widely by many people in Washington as a rogue organization. And you heard Chuck Schumer, as the senator, say, be careful of what you do with the CIA and the intelligence agencies because they can do horrible things to you. It's a rather dramatic statement from a sitting senator who's also the majority leader. One would think he's at least as powerful, if not more so, than the director of the CIA. But I guess that's not the case. So I don't think that's surprising. It's depressing and disappointing. Now, from the Israeli standpoint, it's a different picture. The Israelis have always viewed opportunities in the Arab world to foment discontent, to promote division as something that they could not resist. They saw it as being in their interest to keep the Arabs in a state of hostility with each other. They have worked with the Baluchis in southern Iran for the same purpose. Anything that promotes division. The Israelis are working with the Azeri Turks in the hopes that that too is going to redound to their benefit against Iran, because there's a huge Azeri Turkish population in northern Iran. And the Turks in Azerbaijan, obviously, are very close to them. And the hope is being in Israel that this will be the undoing of the Iranian state. So what they're doing, I'm not saying it's good. I'm not condoning it and trying to legitimate it. But I understand what the Israelis are trying to do. The question is, what are we trying to do? It doesn't make any sense for us to promote this kind of instability. And, you know, we've had war in Syria now since 2010. There's hardly been a break. The population there is being brutalized. Why are we doing this again? Well, it's if we can't control it and we're not in charge of it and we're not setting up a puppet government that serves our interests, Mr. Erdogan is now in serious trouble at home. The Turkish population sees two major threats to Turkey and to the Middle East, to the region. One, of course, are the Kurdish rebels, the PPK, which is originally an old Stalinist insurgency that has grown into something much greater and is dangerous to Turkey. And the other danger to Turkey, of course, is Israel, the Israeli state, and its disruption of the region and its potential as a catalyst for broader war. The Turkish population is firmly opposed to both, very firmly opposed to Israel because of its murderous behavior in Gaza, which continues unchecked. Now, Mr. Erdogan has essentially taken off his mask because, on the one hand, he was trying to posture as supportive of and protective of the Palestinians, but at the same time, he was still smuggling oil through the region to Israel. He was still doing deals under the table with the Israelis for all sorts of things. And now the population knows it. So I'm really curious to see just how much longer Mr. Erdogan lasts. And for the Russians, this was incomprehensible because Mr. Putin had worked hard to help him when he faced a coup inside his own country and stood by Erdogan and has tried to foster the best possible relationship with Turkey that he could get. At the same time, you have the Iranians who've been talking to Erdogan, who's made nice noises, but now we see has done the opposite of what he promised. So I think both Iran and Russia are committed to preserve the Syrian state under Mr. Assad. And I think they will commence to wipe out this 15 to 20,000 man force that's around Aleppo and reaches over to Idlib. It's going to be a bloody affair. It's not going to be nice, but I think they both decided that that's unavoidable.
Is the IDF involved in the actual fighting, either on the ground or from the air?
You know, I've heard discussions from people that say that the Israelis have launched airstrikes, but the Israelis have launched airstrikes for years into Syria with Russian approval. I think that's over now. Whether or not they're doing it at the moment, I don't know. But clearly, the Mossad, the CIA, and the Turkish intelligence forces, those three have worked to bring about this atrocious outcome. And this is atrocious. These Islamists are as bad, if not worse, than ISIS. And after all, they are, frankly, the offspring of ISIS and Al Qaeda and Al Nusra. These organizations are radical Islamists, the sort of thing that the Iranians worked with us to destroy, frankly, when we were fighting ISIS.
How can the American intelligence community justify funding, supporting, and supplying a group like this? And number two, what are 1,000 American troops in uniform, boots on the ground, doing there?
Well, the answer to the first question is we've done this before many times in many places. You can go back to the Contras in Nicaragua. You can look at various entities that we've supported in the Philippines or Vietnam over time. We have a habit of repurposing people that were previously hostile to us in an attempt to harm someone else who opposes us. This is part of the problem with the CIA. I mean, the CIA is regarded widely by many people in Washington as a rogue organization. And you heard Chuck Schumer, as the senator, say, be careful of what you do with the CIA and the intelligence agencies because they can do horrible things to you. It's a rather dramatic statement from a sitting senator who's also the majority leader. One would think he's at least as powerful, if not more so, than the director of the CIA. But I guess that's not the case. So I don't think that's surprising. It's depressing and disappointing. Now, from the Israeli standpoint, it's a different picture. The Israelis have always viewed opportunities in the Arab world to foment discontent, to promote division as something that they could not resist. They saw it as being in their interest to keep the Arabs in a state of hostility with each other. They have worked with the Baluchis in southern Iran for the same purpose. Anything that promotes division. The Israelis are working with the Azeri Turks in the hopes that that too is going to redound to their benefit against Iran, because there's a huge Azeri Turkish population in northern Iran. And the Turks in Azerbaijan, obviously, are very close to them. And the hope is being in Israel that this will be the undoing of the Iranian state. So what they're doing, I'm not saying it's good. I'm not condoning it and trying to legitimate it. But I understand what the Israelis are trying to do. The question is, what are we trying to do? It doesn't make any sense for us to promote this kind of instability. And, we've had war in Syria now since 2010. There's hardly been a break. The population there is being brutalized. Why are we doing this again? Well, it's if we can't control it and we're not in charge of it and we're not setting up a puppet government that serves our interests, then at least we can make it miserable for everyone. I think that's the philosophy.
Back to my question about 1,000 American troops.
Well, the 1,000, I went down this road when Mr. Trump was president the last time, and he wanted to remove our forces from Syria and Iraq, which I thought made infinite sense because there's obviously no strategic purpose or value in keeping them there. But as we know, his attempts to do that were met with tremendous resistance. The CIA, the intelligence services, the State Department, the National Endowment for Democracy, the various bureaucracies with an interest in things like regime change, all cooperated against him. And ultimately, the general officers that were in charge, along with the diplomats, simply lied to the president, told him that we were pulling out when we were not, that we'd reduced the numbers when we hadn't, because they decided that we were going to stay there, because their policy going back to 2010 has been to replace Assad. This is the problem. We have a government in Egypt and a government in Jordan that are effectively puppets of U.S.-Israeli interest. They would like another such puppet in Damascus. The Russians and the Iranians have made that impossible, as has Hezbollah and the Shiite Arabs on the ground in Syria. This was seen as another opportunity, particularly in view of the fact that Hezbollah has been hurt, harmed, damaged, not fatally, but certainly harmed. And it was a cheap and easy way to disrupt potential adversaries in Syria because Syria is unambiguously tied to Iran and Russia.
Will American troops, well, let me go back. Did you discuss with President Trump in your time in the Pentagon the desirability of getting troops out of there? And did he understand the reasons for which you made those arguments?
Well, we discussed a number of issues. That was just one of them. And he was in general in favor of withdrawing troops from most of these overseas garrisons. I mean, one of the questions he asked me was, how long have we been in Korea?
Oh.
I said, sir, 70 years. He said, that's ridiculous. That's too long. So he had a very different mindset at that point. Remember, he was also arguing that the Europeans had to be their own first responders.
Right.
So he was very interested in scaling back the overseas presence, which made a lot of sense. It still does, even more so now because of the precision strike capability that you've seen demonstrated by the Iranians and also primarily by the Russians, which is possessed also by the Chinese and increasingly many other countries. So the only thing you do when you put thousands of troops forward in an area or large numbers of ships at sea right off the coast of some state that you're trying to influence is that you're presenting them increasingly with a target array that's easily destroyed. That means that you end up at war. Well, I think that's ultimately what happened after he left office. The decision was made, we're going to keep them there. And these forces are going to operate as a quote unquote trigger for action on behalf of Israel. I mean, I had people tell me in the building, Colonel McGregor, you don't understand. Those troops have to stay there for Israel. I said, why? He said, well, they have to have us there as an early warning. I said, early warning? The Israelis know more about what's happening over there than we do. They'll know what's going to happen to us before we do in the region. They said, well, that's why they're there. They're a tripwire. You know, this was simply done, and it continues right now. And I suspect that someone in Washington hopes that some of our soldiers may ultimately be embroiled in a fight that brings us into wider war. I mean, that's the only thing I can conceive of.
This alleged IDF involvement in Syria is particularly concerning when viewed in the context of ongoing Turkish actions in the region. Turkey's intelligence services are reportedly playing a key role in facilitating the renewed offensives by rebels and terrorist groups. While Turkey has often portrayed its actions in Syria as targeting Kurdish groups and securing its borders, its broader involvement with rebel factions aligned against Assad aligns suspiciously well with Israeli interests. This convergence of Turkish and Israeli strategies raises questions about the depth of their collaboration and its implications for regional stability. Moreover, the timing of these actions suggests a broader geopolitical play to keep Iranian and Russian forces tied up in Syria. By creating a quagmire for these forces, Israel and its allies might hope to weaken the axis of resistance without engaging in a direct confrontation. This strategy of attrition, however, risks spiraling into a wider conflict, drawing in more regional and international players and exacerbating an already dire humanitarian crisis. The humanitarian toll of such proxy wars cannot be overstated. Syrian civilians, already battered by over a decade of conflict, are the primary victims of these geopolitical maneuvers. The renewed offensives, intensified bombings, and alleged foreign interventions only deepen the suffering of a population struggling to survive amidst devastation. Any strategic benefits gained by the involved parties come at an enormous human cost, further tarnishing their moral and ethical standing. For years, Israel has justified its actions in Syria under the banner of national security, claiming to preempt threats from Iranian and Hezbollah forces. However, if these new allegations are confirmed, they could undermine Israel's narrative and expose a more aggressive agenda of regional destabilization. Such revelations would not only strain Israel's relations with its neighbors, but could also provoke international backlash, especially if evidence of complicity in enabling terrorist offensive surfaces. The broader implications of these developments are troubling. If the allegations of IDF collaboration with Turkish intelligence to support rebel forces are accurate, it represents a dangerous precedent of state actors directly enabling non-state armed groups. Such actions could embolden other states to pursue similar strategies, further eroding international norms and worsening global security. As the situation unfolds, independent verification of these claims will be crucial. Transparency and accountability are essential to understanding the full scope of these alleged actions and their consequences. Without credible evidence, the accusations risk becoming another layer of misinformation in an already complex and contested conflict. However, if proven true, they would demand a serious re-evaluation of Israel's role in Syria and its broader regional strategy. The Syrian conflict has long been a proxy battleground for regional and international powers. Allegations of IDF involvement underscore the intricate web of alliances and rivalries shaping the war. As more details emerge, the world will watch closely to see whether these claims signify a new chapter in the conflict or simply another episode in the ongoing saga of Middle Eastern geopolitics.
Well, I know one thing. Right now, it seems like the terrorists is like cockroaches. They just coming from everywhere, you know. And I don't care what nobody say. If Iran is not ready to send tens of thousands of soldiers to Syria, it could fall. Because Russia can't do it. It's in a full scope. See, when they crushed the rebels last time, Russia was able to send more troops, more weaponry, because they wasn't the Ukraine war wasn't going on. Hezbollah was able to help more, but Hezbollah has been weak. Iran got to do it. Iran got to do it, and I don't know what type of games. And one thing we got to know now: the Arab world is a very tricky place. The Arab kingdom showed themselves to be cowards, scared of NATO, scared of Israel, but backstabbers and deceivers. Putin might understand, you know, is it worth going all out in a place where, like what Turkey just did? And they're not Arabs, but they've been part of the Ottoman Empire ruled over the Arabs for dang near 500 years. So like Turkey just stabbed Putin in the back. It's a very treacherous place. But Putin cannot allow Syria to fall. It'll be the end of Syria as an axis of resistance.
What's happening right now in
And the
Syria?
Christians will be slaughtered.
Who's behind this?
Well, obviously, Mr. Erdogan is the key person behind this.
But
The
Persians,
that have
Iranians, the Persians, it's a Game of Thrones right in our face. You have the Persians who done ruled over the Arabs and the Ottomans. You got the Ottoman Empire. Then you got the Arabs, you know, and the terrorists are pawns, you know.
And well organized, even though they are very hostile towards one another. Many of these different groups, they've been at war with each other in Idlib, in occupied Idlib. And the Turkish government has always been trying to keep the peace and keep them coordinated. But they succeeded in organizing them as a single fighting force, the different Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda affiliates, and also elements of ISIS. And he viewed the timing was perfect for him, and it was perfect for Netanyahu, because when Netanyahu spoke about needing a ceasefire to deal with the so-called Iranian threat, that's what he meant. Because when Iran strikes the Israeli regime, and it will strike, it will have nothing to do with Hezbollah. It will have nothing to do with the battles on the ground. It will be missiles that will be fired towards Israel. So it can't be to protect the Israeli regime against incoming missiles. So obviously the Iranian threat, the so-called Iranian threat, has to be dealt with on the ground, and if it's not Lebanon, then obviously it's Syria. So that's one issue. The second is that the Israelis have been threatening the Syrian government recently in, a, in very seriously. They've been making very serious threats. So literally the day after the ceasefire, and it is a shaky ceasefire, and that is also significant because on the one hand, Hezbollah is looking to its back, and on the other hand, the Israelis are constantly violating the ceasefire. This attack came literally a day after, and therefore it suits Netanyahu's purposes. And I think it's very clear that Erdogan and Netanyahu are very much in coordination, and it fits the pattern. Netanyahu, after 14 months, he continues to transport very inexpensive oil to Israel from Baku and Central Asia. If Erdogan wanted it to stop, he could have told Aliyev to end it. Because some in the Turkish government say it's not in our hands, which is, of course, nonsense. But in any case, Erdogan has that influence over Aliyev that, that could have brought it to a halt. Also, after the ICC ruling, Erdogan could have said, well, we have the ICC has declared Netanyahu as a war criminal who has to be apprehended, and that could have been a legal excuse to stop the flow. But it was obvious that he never planned to stop selling oil, and trade continues directly and indirectly. Diplomatic ties exist, intelligence officials travel back and forth. So Netanyahu and Erdogan have never really had any serious problem. If you recall, when the Israelis were threatening to invade Lebanon, Erdogan said that if the Israelis, if they attack Lebanon, will send in troops.
Absolutely.
Not only did they not do anything about it, but they sent in troops to stab Hezbollah in the back. So I think that Erdogan wants a piece of the cake, and he wants to be in the good books of Trump and Netanyahu. And Netanyahu needs to break Syria in order to surround Hezbollah and be able to fight Hezbollah in a much stronger position under those circumstances. If Hezbollah is surrounded and the Israeli regime attacks again, then it will be much more difficult than now, because Syria is key, not only in supporting Hezbollah, but Palestinian groups in Syria, in Lebanon, but also elsewhere in the West Bank and even in Gaza.
Let's talk about 2020 because it's so important in what's going on in Syria. There was an agreement between the government in Syria and these Takfiri groups that they had some sort of ceasefire agreement. And on the other hand, we had an agreement between Iran, Russia, and Turkey about the militarized zone, talking about Aleppo and Idlib. What has happened to those agreements?
Well, they've fallen apart. The Turkish government undermined the agreement, and Iran was skeptical from the beginning. It was the Russians, to be very blunt, that were more keen on this equation. The Iranians believed that ultimately Mr. Erdogan would violate the deal because Erdogan has a history of violating agreements. And he's constantly tilting. One day he's tilting towards the east, the next day he's tilting towards the west. Some people think that that is very smart of him. The fact that he's always constantly playing people off against one another, or countries off against one another. But what it does in the long run is that it creates a huge mistrust. And so he caused Iran to completely distrust him. The Russians, due to a host of different reasons, they were perhaps less skeptical, but also they had their own issues that they wanted to deal with. And therefore, they took a different approach. But I think what Erdogan did in Syria has really changed things. The Russians are very angry. And the Iranians, of course, are very angry as well. But there is a very different mood today than when Erdogan first began building up ISIS and Al Qaeda in Syria. And that is that the regional mood has changed. As we've seen, the Arab League is not on his side. They've condemned what he's done. The Chinese, the Russians, of course, and other major players, they have condemned this. The Europeans don't seem to be all that enthusiastic, and even the Americans are having a hard time justifying it. So even Qatar, the language that you see on Al Jazeera, Arabic and English, is different from what it was in 2011, 12, 13, and so on. So this has put Mr. Erdogan in a very difficult position. And the very fact that initially he, through those who carry out his propaganda, they were trying to say that this was just a limited operation, but it was obviously the numbers of fighters were huge. After the advances, they brought in more troops. They expanded the front. It was obviously never intended to be a limited operation. It was intended to bring down the Syrian government. Hezbollah had withdrawn into Syria, not because it used its forces on the battlefield. Most of Hezbollah forces never got close to the battlefield, but they were prepared for war. So the focus was on the Israeli regime in case there was, they were needed there. Otherwise, only a fraction of Hezbollah's forces were ever used on the battlefield, a very small segment of them. Yet, right before the attack happened, the Israelis bombed all the border crossings, thus slowing down the return of Hezbollah troops. It was obvious that this was the Israelis, they bombed those border crossings so Hezbollah couldn't go back into Syria quickly, and then that coincided with the offensive. The coordination between Erdogan and Netanyahu was clear as day, but it went badly for Erdogan, both politically, now militarily, because the Russians are all in, the Iranians are all in, and the Syrian armed forces have regained they've reorganized, regrouped, and they will begin pushing back. And of course, more troops will be coming in, more support will be coming in, and time is not on his side. So he's both politically isolated, but also militarily. The terrorists are not going to have an easy time dealing with these combined forces.
Are Iranians helping the Assad government and its military to organize? Because it seems that they were not prepared for this type of attack. And yesterday I've learned from one. Yeah, go ahead, Professor Marandi.
Yes, well, the Iranians and the Russians, have been based in different places. So, for example, one of the places that the Iranians have been focused on was in near Deir ez-Zor, near the border with Iraq, where the Americans are, they're trying to close that border to isolate Syria. So the Iranians and their allied forces have been focused there, and some forces have been focused on near the Golan, the Syrian occupied Golan, in case the Israeli regime were to attack Syria or to attack Syria to get into Lebanon. So only one Iranian person was martyred during the operation. That was a general. He was assassinated by a drone. There is speculation that that was an Israeli drone, but I haven't followed up on that. But at the time when I was informed, the belief was that it was an Israeli drone. And of course, if that was the case, then that is further evidence of coordination between the Israeli regime and Netanyahu. But if it was a drone by the terrorists, that means that Turkey indirectly murdered an Iranian general. But a significant number of Russians were killed, and because they were in that area. But there are significant numbers of Iranians who've gone to Syria. Those numbers will probably increase. Iranian advisors in large numbers. If necessary, Iranian troops will enter the fray as well. But right now, a large number of Iranian advisors, from my understanding, have entered, and so of Iraqis affiliated with the resistance, and in large numbers, and I think probably other groups that work under the Iranian command. So the numbers are increasing, but they've already increased as we speak. They are working to push back these terror groups. But the Syrian army has regrouped. That is an important point. There have been some very heavy. There right now, as we speak, there's very heavy fighting going on, both in multiple fronts. And the Syrians have gained some land territory today, but I think this is going to take a while for things to get back to normal. Personally, I think that there will be a lot of discussions going on between the Iranians and the Russians, but I think that the Iranians will be insisting that the whole issue of Idlib has to be resolved once and for all.
Yeah, one of the reasons that Iran couldn't solve the issue of Idlib, as you've mentioned, was the Russians were not so keen about solving the situation. They wanted to have some sort of common ground between Iran and Turkey. Was that the case during those days?
Yes, Iran also wants common ground with Turkey as well, and so do the Russians. But the Iranians felt that this is going to be a problem, and that it's not going to end well. And the Russians possibly felt the same. I don't know, but they were pushing for some sort of agreement. That agreement was achieved, but we are where we are now. But yes, the Russians, I think, especially after Ukraine, they felt the need to quiet other fronts, but this happened before the war in Ukraine, this agreement. So, but still, Russia wanted good relations with Turkey. Again, Iran wants very good relations with Turkey. Even during the height of the fighting, Iran and Turkey cooperated in other areas. But this particular chapter, what Mr. Erdogan did this time around was particularly shocking for everyone, because the war in Gaza was going on. Hezbollah was making enormous sacrifices for the people of Gaza. The sacrifices that Lebanon has made are huge. And the Syrians have made huge sacrifices. They've been bombed regularly by the Israelis, and it doesn't even get into the Western media. They don't even talk about it. But they've been constantly slaughtering Syrians. They actually, a few months ago, I was in Syria, and I was invited to the Cuban ambassador's residence, the residence of his. And I've been told that that building was destroyed in one of the more recent bombings. There was an airstrike where I think 15 people were killed. I think the ambassador wasn't there, but the point is that the destruction in Damascus is so extensive that even I, with my limited experience of Damascus, know places which have been destroyed. So the Syrians have been making huge sacrifices for Gaza, for Lebanon, and then being stabbed in the back like that, I think is quite stunning.
Yesterday, I've learned from one of our guests, Dr. Gilbert Doctorow. He said that Erdogan called Putin, but Putin didn't answer his phone. Do you think that Russia is feeling, because we had some sort of the same type of situation before? If you remember, we had Ukrainian prisoners in the hand of Russians, which were handed over to Turkey, and then Turkey gave them to, they're doing the same right now. do you think at the end of the day, Russia is getting to the point that totally understands what would be the motive of Erdogan? And because they have to, if they want to talk with Turkey again, we had the foreign minister of Iran going to Syria, then to Turkey, and we've learned that the president of Iran talked with Putin. They're gonna meet in the near future. But at the end of the day, if you want to talk with Erdogan and his government and his administration, you have to understand their attitude. They're not gonna change it. They're just repeating what they have been doing all this for many years. But right now, as you've mentioned, the situation is totally different because we have Palestinians, and Donald Trump is coming to the office and he's just sending a vicious messages to Palestinians, and we're gonna, you have to release the hostages or we're gonna just smash you all of you, destroy all of you. And you see Erdogan doing this. How do you see what's going on in the mind of the administration in Iran and in Russia, and how they can deal with Erdogan?
I'd just like to add that, Palestinians in the West Bank right now, I think they have, from the men and women and children among them, I think maybe 12,000, maybe your viewers could correct me if I'm wrong. I think they have 12,000 hostages in Israeli prisoners, and I think more than half of them, two-thirds of them, they have never been charged. And they have children in prison. And why are they hostages? Because they're from the occupied West Bank. The West Bank is illegally occupied by the Israeli regime. And this is not including the hostages that have been taken from Gaza. So literally you have tens of thousands of Palestinian hostages, but Trump or none of the Western leaders, they care. None of them care about it at all. And these hostages go back well before October the 7th. The reason why October the 7th happened was that they wanted to take Israeli prisoners, and a lot of them were soldiers, and a lot of them who were even those who were in the party alongside the apartheid wall. They were young adults. They were all reservists or soldiers. It's not as if they were like children dancing at 5 a.m. over there. They were all adults. So, but in any case, even the reason why they took them hostage or prisoner was because they wanted their prisoners and hostages to be released. People who've been in jail, women in jail who've been sexually abused, children who've been in jail who've been sexually abused, and men as well. They wanted these people released. That's what this was about. But in any case, that aside, um, I think that the relationship with Mr. Erdogan has evolved significantly. And, I should also add that when Erdogan gave those prisoners that he promised not to hand them over, he promised not to hand them over to Ukraine, they were Azov battalion prisoners. They were fascists. They were Nazis. And Nazis for the Russians are like ISIS for Iranians because of the Second World War and the mass slaughter of Slavs. The biggest victim of the Nazis, the number one victims of the Nazis were the Slavs, were the Russians by far, more than Jews or Gypsies or anyone else. But of course, since they're Russian, the West doesn't say anything about it. Just like the Chinese, who were huge victims during the Second World War, and they had, after the Russians, or maybe alongside the Russians, they had the largest number of people slaughtered by the Japanese occupation. And of course, the Japanese occupation, that is also a long story, how the Americans really pushed for this war. But in any case, uh, these Azov battalion people, which were handed over, I think exposed the nature of Mr. Erdogan, that he's not a person who keeps promises. But what happened this time around was much worse because they tried to destroy the whole of Syria. They killed Russians in the process. And this was not about a few soldiers, this was about an entire country. And Turkey wanted to humiliate Russia, as well as Iran, I'm sure, by just taking the country with, through some sort of blitzkrieg attack. But I think, well, Erdogan, not Turkey. Turks are among the most steadfast supporters of the Palestinian people. And we've seen many protests against Erdogan by Turks who've been protesting against trade, who've been protesting against his relations with the Israeli regime, who've been protesting against the export of oil. And a lot of Turks have boycotted all Western products and shops and Starbucks and McDonald's. So ordinary Turks in Turkey, are a bit, different. They have a completely different attitude than that of Erdogan. But in any case, he's shown himself to be completely untrustworthy. And I think in the future, the Iranians and the Russians will never treat him seriously again. And even if they have another agreement with him, they're not going to believe that he's going to abide by it because that's just not what he does.
In your opinion, there are two different concepts of the main reason of this attack on the part of Erdogan, and maybe Israelis are behind this. And they have, we're sure that they have connection with these people. But do you think that how much of what's going on right now is in Syria is related to the conflict in Ukraine? Because we've learned that the drones that are using right now in Syria are Turkish drones made in Ukraine. And how much of what's going on is related to the conflict in Ukraine, and how much, and the other side would be how influential that would be for the conflict between Hezbollah and Israel, because we know Israel has a lot of interest in disconnecting Iran from Hezbollah.
Well, these are two questions, so I'll deal with them separately. Ukraine is very much linked to Syria, and that is another betrayal because all of the equipment, all of the weapons, all of the vehicles, everything that goes into Idlib goes through the Turkish border. So they are the ones who are in charge. Ukrainian trainers, Ukrainian weapons, whatever assistance that Ukraine gives is done with the consent of Mr. Erdogan. Countries in the Persian Gulf, if they are giving funding, which they do, some certain countries, it's done through Mr. Erdogan. So he is definitely in charge of all of this. But without a doubt, the Ukrainians are trying very hard to get revenge on Russia through Syria. But I think they've miscalculated in a big way because first of all, the Iranians and their troops, their allies that are in Syria that will increase in number in Syria too. They will be doing a lot of the work on the ground, but the Russians' major focus will be in the air, even though they are bringing in troops. But their focus is on the air. The Russian Air Force has not been used extensively in Ukraine. And therefore, the Russians have no shortage of pilots and planes and ammunition to drop on targets in these occupied territories. So now that they failed to take Damascus and Hama and so on, although they've taken a huge segment of the country, they are going to be very vulnerable, especially because they're spread out and a lot of the terrain is flat and very good for jets to find targets. And of course, there's the Syrian Air Force as well. So the Russians are not going to have to bring in a lot of troops from the war fronts in Ukraine. It's not going to have that sort of impact. Personally, I think that Netanyahu made a mistake. And there's no doubt that the real person behind this is Netanyahu. And Erdogan is working with Netanyahu, but the timing serves Netanyahu's purpose first and foremost. No doubt about it. And Erdogan was very foolish to do it now. He could have waited at least a couple of months if it was for his own personal ambitions. But he didn't because the Israelis needed it now. But what we're seeing effectively is that the Iranian troops and the Russian troops, but more importantly the Iranian troops, are going to be back in Syria for a long time. And that is not good news for Netanyahu. And Netanyahu knows that he cannot touch the Iranians, because if he does, the Iranians will hit him back. And the Iranians are going to hit him back. The Iranian strike is coming, but it could happen next week. It could happen. I'm pretty sure it will happen before Trump comes to power, although it's just a personal belief. I don't have any inside information. But Netanyahu knows that he cannot strike Iranians anymore, because that'll just give him an opportunity to strike at Israel. And that's, Iran would like to have that excuse. It doesn't want to have its soldiers hurt, but it wants to have an excuse to punish the Israeli regime for a host of reasons. But I think it was a major miscalculation on behalf of Netanyahu, because they failed to overthrow the Syrian government. They did a very good job in psychological warfare during the first 3-4 days, but things were never really as bad as they were saying, although they were making progress. But now that the lines have held and support is coming in, and the extremists, the terrorists are giving huge casualties, although the Syrian government has lost quite a few men, but the extremists their casualties are far higher. Now that the tide is beginning to turn, I think it's clear that both Netanyahu and Erdogan both made major miscalculations.
How about, is there going to be any sort of meeting between Erdogan together with Iran and Russia, or they're not considering any sort of these type of talks?
I don't think that in the short term we're going to see such a thing, because this was big. Russians have been murdered, and this was a major betrayal, and especially to the Russians, because the Russians were the ones who were trying to convince the Iranians to accept, the sort of stalemate or a sort of agreement over Idlib. The Iranians were not happy. The Iranians back then I was in Syria at that time when eastern Aleppo was liberated. I was in Western Aleppo. I was actually on campus. It was interesting. Western Aleppo was held by government forces. Eastern Aleppo was held by Al-Qaeda and their affiliates. When they took Aleppo back then, these extremists, these terrorists were on the back foot. They were losing. They were retreating on all fronts. But Turkey, the Russians didn't want Erdogan to be humiliated. The Iranians, of course, didn't want to see Erdogan humiliated, but they also felt that this had to come to an end. But now that it's come to this point, I think the Russians are probably more angry than the Iranians, although this is just sheer speculation on my behalf. But I think the sense of betrayal among Russians is even greater than that of the Iranians, because I think the Iranians were expecting it.
And the other question would be, right now, if they go to...
And by the way, may I just add one thing? And that is that some say that the advances that were made, they were much more, they were unexpected, and that these groups really didn't want to go so far. The evidence doesn't show that. When they made those advances, there were new waves coming in, wave after wave. It was obviously intended to go very far. And Erdogan, he holds the leash. He could have pulled them back at any time or told them not to go any further at some point or another, but that never happened. As I said, even there's heavy fighting now, but very heavy fighting is going on. But about 24 hours ago, there was really tough fighting in Hama. They were trying to move into the city. They failed and they had to retreat. But the point is that this is no limited operation, and Mr. Erdogan has not pulled anyone back from any of their positions. In fact, it's been the opposite.
If you look at the motives behind this action, behind this type of mindset on the part of Erdogan, do you think that he's willing to overthrow the government in Syria, or as one of the members, nationalist member, if I'm not mistaken, Turkish parliament, he said that Aleppo is part of Turkey and it's going to get back to Turkey. Is that related to those cities, Idlib, Aleppo, or they want to overthrow the government in Syria? And what would be the benefit for them? It's all about refugees in Turkey or something else?
I think it's both. I think they wanted to overthrow President Assad, but also I think the Turkish government wanted a very strong sphere of influence in northern Syria and in northern Iraq. They have the same ambitions in northern Iraq, and they would like to see their sphere of influence. In fact, President Erdogan said that just a few days ago, that they want to create a buffer zone uh, across the south of Turkey all the way to Iran. So all of these things, when you put them together, it's clear as day what was going on. But he would like a sphere of influence, and then that ultimately, I would imagine that over time, over years, it would become a part of Turkey. But that's just not possible. I'm very surprised that he carried out this operation because people have been speaking about Erdogan's hypocrisy since October the 7th. But carrying out this operation at this moment, is clear that this was done in coordination with the Israelis, and this really destroyed President Erdogan's image, except for those really hardcore people who, whatever, no matter what he does, they're going to back him, and no matter what the resistance does, they're going to hate the resistance. It doesn't matter that what the axis of resistance does or doesn't do. So I have no doubt that he would like to have parts of Syria to be a part of Turkey ultimately over time, and to have a sphere of influence um, across Syria, and a broken and fragmented Syria is something that the Israeli regime wants as well. Uh, it works very well for him and for Netanyahu. But again, the problem is that the world has changed. The Russians today are far more assertive. The Iranians are far more assertive. The axis of resistance is far more assertive. Israel is despised. And so Erdogan's policies over the last year have not gone unnoticed. In the past, he just ranted about Israel, and people, loved it, or many in Turkey loved it. He didn't have to do anything. He'd give some Palestinians visas and scholarships to study, and he'd gain popularity that way. He opened offices so that Hamas leaders could stay there or their families could stay there. That gave him credibility without paying a price. He didn't give Gaza anything. He didn't provide them with weapons, or he didn't help fund the tunnels. Or, I mean, the Iranians paid billions of dollars for these defense capabilities. He never did any of that, but he got the popularity. The Iranians didn't get the popularity because no one knew what Iran was doing back then. Now they know, but he was benefiting. But now, in the last year, I think that's all gone away, except for the most hardcore supporters, as I said earlier. His support base has fractured, and now you do see across the Arab world governments and ordinary people criticizing him, attacking him for these policies. It's a different situation. He made a catastrophic mistake. I think also Netanyahu made a major mistake because, as I said, these Iranian troops are not going to go away anytime soon.
The question is, if he wants to overthrow the government in Syria, who's going to replace the government? These takfiris, these people, these extremists that are just killing each and everybody in that region? Because at the end of the day, if let's assume it's in his mind, but what would happen to Lebanon? What would happen to Gaza? It's not, it's all connected. If these people who are, we know that these takfirs are directly connected with Israel. They talk with it. They would do everything in favor of Israel. And what's going on in that direction in the mind of
But that's
Erdogan?
exactly what the situation was like in Idlib. In Idlib, these different groups have constantly been killing each other. Even during these last few days, in Aleppo, there was heavy fighting between two of the different factions. And there have been significant casualties in clashes between the different groups who were fighting over territory gained or over uh, booty or over assets that they captured. Uh, these groups hate each other, and they were at each other's throats in Idlib over the last 4 or 5 years. But that was fine for Mr. Erdogan. He, as long as they served his purpose, um, and that would be the future of Syria. Certain areas he may take for himself, and then other areas, if they're broken and fragmented, that keep Syria weak or what's left of Syria weak, that serves Netanyahu's purpose, that serves the Israeli regime's purpose, that serves Erdogan's purpose. So what if people are at each other's throats? So what if people are killing each other in these no man lands? What they don't want is a strong Syria. What they don't want is a Syria that can protect its borders, that can field soldiers on the border with the Israeli regime. That's what the Israelis don't want. That's what Erdogan doesn't want, and both of them succeeded in doing so. It's quite stunning the amount of damage that Erdogan has done to the economy of Turkey as well. Not only do we have huge numbers of refugees, but also the trade that has been lost between Turkey and Syria is huge. Erdogan used to have go on family vacation with President Assad and his and the two wives were part of it. But he was benefiting. Of course, economically, Turkey benefited at the beginning in 2012 and 13 because all the factories were being stolen and taken to Turkey. The Syria, the areas controlled by these Takfiri groups, they were being plundered. And I went to, for example, the industrial park in East Aleppo during the period when East Aleppo had just been liberated, and we stayed there a couple of nights. The factory was all the factories were gone. There was nothing left. Everything had been taken and sold in Turkey. So the industrial base of northern Syria simply was, disappeared. It was taken away. But after that, the absence of trade, the absence of business, and then the sanctions, the Caesar sanctions, which are really barbaric, the sanctions imposed on Syrians, it's destroyed what's left of the economy. But in any case, because of all this, Turkey has lost many billions of dollars. And again, as I said, the sheer amount of refugees and the tensions that they've caused, unfortunately, they're victims of Erdogan's policies. But in any case, the tensions that have been caused as a result of those refugees are an issue, is a big issue in Turkey as well. So he wanted to become a man of great influence to, I don't know, reestablish the Ottoman Empire of sorts. But what he did was he destroyed the, the positive legacy that he had for his first decade in power, where he did do good work for the country, and then he turned into something very different from the Netanyahu, from the Erdogan of the first decade, and his policies became sinister, and his attitudes became, um, uh, they changed completely. He seems like a very different person from the person who was in charge during the first decade. Very
People,
cynical.
pardon me. Many people are trying to diminish the picture to a fight between Turkey and Iran, because there's what they're arguing is that Iran has some sort of influence on all of these countries, and Turkey wants to break that chain of resistance that exists. But at the end of the day, we know what Iran does, and what's happening between Iran and Israel is because of Gaza, because of Palestine. It's not out. It's because of what has happened in southern Lebanon. All these people are under the thumb of Israel because they're trying to do everything to these people. But Erdogan, here comes the question. I don't understand the behavior of Erdogan. The, do you think that in his mind and his administration, do they really believe that if Iran goes weaker and these people being defeated in that region, that would benefit Turkey?
Well, first of all, I think Erdogan went to Lebanon after uh, the uh, the the flotilla incident, where a number of Turks were martyred in the Mediterranean by the Israeli regime. I think there were 10. Um, and when he went to Lebanon, Hezbollah treated him as a hero. They were, flags all over the place and people were welcoming him. Hezbollah was behind most of it. Back then, they viewed him very differently. And Iran wanted Turkey to be a part of this axis of resistance. And Iran was pushing Turkey to make the right decisions, to cut off oil, to break off ties, to break off trade. If they'd done that, the situation in Israel would have been very different. And it would have put pressure on other countries to do something. But since Turkey didn't do it, no one else did. Jordan, Turkey, Egypt, the Emirates, Morocco, they all preserved their ties and businesses. Turkey made some small steps when it came to business, but not really what Erdogan pretended that he had done. So if he had helped the resistance would have welcomed him. It would have. I think if he had joined, the situation today would have been very different. But maybe once upon a time he did have certain ideals, but after 2011 that changed. When I remember this young reporter, Serena Sheen. She worked for Press TV, and she was alongside the Turkish-Syrian border when there was heavy fighting. I think it was in Ain al-Arab or Kobani, if I'm not mistaken. And she reported that World Food Organization trucks were being used to take in weapons and troops for ISIS into Turkey. And then Turkish intelligence said that she was a spy, and she reported that. It's people can find it online. It's on YouTube and elsewhere. And she said, "I'm very worried, and I haven't done anything. I've just been reporting facts." And hours later, she was killed in a car accident as she was leaving the border area. And now there's an award in her name, Serena Sheen. She was a Lebanese American with 2 kids. I think, after that, it was becoming increasingly clear that the sort of sinister role that Turkish intelligence was playing and the Turkish military, at the behest of Erdogan, of course, in Syria. And I think that, from then onwards, this was a very different Turkey. This is not the Turkey of Najmuddin Erbakan. If he was in power, I think that Israel would be in a much tougher situation. He was a very principled person. Of course, I know what I'm saying is not going to please some of my some of your Turkish viewers, but as I said, the Erbakan was very different from Erdogan, and the policies that we've been seeing pursued since 2012, at least, even though since 2011, when that's when the American operation began, and when Obama signed off this operation, where was this operation being implemented? Where were they carrying out from? It was being done from Istanbul and from Jordan. And I don't want to name names, but a person who was involved in Afghanistan during the Afghanistan, that person was in Pakistan during the 1980s, and he was involved in what was going on in Afghanistan. And that person in late 2011 and early 2012 told me, I was in Beirut at the time, I was on sabbatical. He told me that this is a dirty war. And I said, how do you know? He said, because all the people who I knew in Pakistan are now in Istanbul. So it was clear what was going on. It's not as if he didn't know back then. So this is basically an extension of that. But the painful thing about what he just did was that it was while the resistance was actually giving huge sacrifices for the sake of Gaza to save lives. Hezbollah has paid a heavy price. The people of Lebanon have paid a heavy price for this victory. It wasn't an absolute victory. But if Turkey had helped, Hezbollah's victory would have been absolute. But instead, not only did they not help, but ultimately they stabbed the resistance in the back. I mean, Erdogan did, not Turkey.
Do you think that Turkey, that Turkey wanted to be part of BRICS? How is that going to affect their request and to be part of BRICS? And do you think, because many people, when you look at the picture in Ukraine and in the Middle East, we are seeing that the East and the West are fighting each other. And Turkey, it seems that they want to play both sides. And they're part of NATO. They want to be part of BRICS. But right now, do you think that the situation that's happening right now would influence the decision of the Russian on Turkey being part of BRICS?
And Iran. But well, first of all, I want to make the distinction. I want to make sure that I'm making a distinction between Turkey or Turkey and Erdogan. Because again, I stress, the Turkish public is very much supportive of the Palestinian people. They had huge rallies. They've had, effective boycotts, and they continue to boycott. And even now, people are protesting against Erdogan, the oil sales, the diplomatic ties, the business ties, and they go to jail. They're going to jail. Some are in jail right now because of their protests. And so, if I say Turkey, I mean Erdogan. And if I say Erdogan, I mean Erdogan. But I think it will be much more difficult. We'll have to see what happens a year down the road, because at the end of the day, Turkey is not Erdogan. And Iran would like to see Turkey inside BRICS, and so would Russia. They want Turkey to be on this side. But because of Erdogan, I think that raises serious questions, because he could join BRICS and then, undermine BRICS, to gain something from Trump. He's not someone that can be trusted anymore. So I think that there would be serious doubts as to whether he would be allowed into BRICS at this point. Of course, BRICS is an ongoing project. It's not an organization that's achieved what its ideals yet. It's moving in that direction. It is an important organization, but it will take time to reach the sort of so many people are very idealistic about BRICS, and they were hoping that in Kazan something wonderful would happen. I think they were being more than a bit too optimistic. But in any case, it's an important, very very important organization. I don't want to diminish that at all. It's a very important organization. It will become more important. But as long as Erdogan's in power, I think that's going to impact many things.
Yeah. The other issue right now is the situation between Hezbollah or Lebanon and Israel. Do you think that this temporary ceasefire is going to be to last, and how long is it going? Because right now we've learned that yesterday we learned that 52 attacks from Israel on Lebanon, on southern Lebanon. And what does it mean at the end of the day? If that's a ceasefire, what they're attacking Lebanon, and how? Yeah, go ahead, Professor.
Well, in 2006, we did have a similar situation. After the ceasefire or a cessation of hostilities, whatever it is that we should call it, the Israeli regime violated uh, the ceasefire or cessation of hostilities repeatedly. This time around, they've done the same. I think they've killed more people than last time. I think so far, they've, at least until yesterday, they murdered 19 people, ordinary people. In one instance, they murdered 9 people. And the Western media, again, Western governments, Western diplomats, they don't care. And even though they're based in Lebanon, again, this is, as I said once before on your show, this is not Gaza where they can pretend that they don't have verified information. In Beirut, all the major Western media outlets have a presence, and Western embassies are there, and they know exactly what's going on, but they play this down. Interestingly, CNN did a report where they did admit that the Israelis were violating the truce, although they, from what I saw, they said nothing about the large number of deaths. 19 people being killed during a ceasefire is no small number. Lebanon is not a huge country. So, but why wouldn't they? I mean, when Netanyahu is a genocidal monster, but also when Syria is being undermined by Erdogan, why wouldn't Netanyahu try to keep Hezbollah uh, focused to the south, so that Hezbollah would not be able to help hold back ISIS and Al Qaeda? Why wouldn't they do? I mean, I assume that would be exactly what he would want to do. He would want to constantly violate the ceasefire so that Hezbollah would be focused on the south and to distract them away from Syria, while Erdogan's foot soldiers would be, causing chaos in that country. So I think that's part of it, but also it's just sinister Israeli regime. Their people are genocidal. They support genocide. People who've gone to Palestine during the last year have every single person who I've seen who's gone to Palestine over the last year that I've seen speak out about their experiences have said these people are genocidal. Everyone, a couple more recently, not to me, but I've seen them speak about it online. They're genocidal. They support the genocide. So these are people who, they take pleasure in killing people. They take pleasure in bombing houses. They take pleasure at snipers taking out little kids and mothers and children. So why not kill some Lebanese? But again, I think that there's also a broader picture here, and that is that they want to keep Hezbollah focused to the south and prevent Hezbollah from being able to do more to help Syria.
I think you've mentioned Donald Trump's position and the way he's talking about Gazans, Palestinians, and he's asking to release hostages. He's asking Hamas to release hostages, and on the other hand, he's not asking Israelis to release the hostages in Israel. And we know what would be the outcome of these type of policies under Donald Trump administration. How the region is prepared for these type of policies, in your opinion? Because if they go with the annexation of the West Bank or maybe the northern Gaza, there has to be some sort of plan to go against it. Do you think that I'm talking about Iran and the Arab states? Is there any sort of understanding on how to deal with these type of policies?
Well, he's not asking, he's making very ugly threats. He's speaking like a genocidal monster himself, despite the fact that he presented himself as the peacemaker and the person who's against wars. I don't think many of us believed it for a second, but many were hoping beyond hope that he would be uh, different. Scott Ritter, very smart guy, very principled guy, very good guy. Uh, I think he was being naive, but not because he's a naive person. Out of desperation, hoping that someone will maybe do something. Uh, I understand that completely. I understand that position completely. Why he would maybe under circumstances I would do the same thing. It's just the United States is like sinister. All sides are sinister. Both sides are controlled by the neocons, by the Zionists, by the warmongers. I mean, the Democrats, Jake Sullivan, Zionist, supremacist, Blinken, the same. You can't get any worse than that. But Kushner talking about developing Gaza into resorts and taking the Palestinians into the desert. That's the United States. So um, I think that it's unclear what Trump is going to do, because Trump does say things that you know don't necessarily make sense. He says things that he doesn't do, and he's constantly shifting his position. He's influenced by people. He makes sudden decisions. It's difficult to say what he will do, but one thing that I can say for sure is that the world has changed a lot in the last 8 years, and especially during the last 3 years. The world has changed a lot. The United States is much weaker today than it was when Trump came to power. And rivals of the United States, or non-Western powers, let's say, uh, because the United States sees everyone as a rival. Everyone else just wants to live their lives. The Iranians don't have any inherent animosity towards the United States, but the Americans won't get off our back. But rivals or countries in the global south or the global majority or whatever one would like to call it, they've been on the rise. China today is not the China of 8 years ago. Russia today is not the Russia of 8 years ago. Iran today is definitely not the Iran of 8 years ago. And we even see the shift over Syria as reflecting that. When the dirty war in Syria started, Syria was expelled from the Arab League. Now the Arab League is fully supporting Syria. Why? Why that change? It's in the Israeli interests to undermine Syria. It's what the Americans also want. It's what NATO also wants. But the Arab League doesn't see it that way. The world is changing. I'm not saying the Arab League countries, the majority, still aren't in the U.S. camp, but it's more complicated than before. The United States is not the power that it was before, and public opinion in our region has shifted. People are outraged. The mood has shifted. People don't see what's going on in Syria as many thought it was a decade ago. They're more politically aware. They see that this is hypocrisy. They see that this is a stab in the back. They see that these extremist groups, they're not about Palestine. They see that Erdogan is not at all thinking about Palestine. He's thinking about Erdogan. So the mood has changed. The world has changed. The balance of power has shifted. Trump does not have the tools at his disposal that he had 8 years ago, and he promised his own supporters that he's going to stop the wars. And then, so if he comes and begins a war on day one when he comes to power, how is that going to be seen? And then his opponents, they're out to get him. The hatred for Trump today among his opponents, I think, is greater than 4 or 8 years ago. The animosity is huge. They will use any excuse to go after him. So he may do stupid things, but it's going to be much more difficult for the United States, both internationally and internally, especially because Trump is such a divisive person, both internationally and internally.
Just to wrap up this session, one of the other comments on the part of Trump was that he was trying to threaten countries that don't want to use US dollar for their trades. Do you think at the same time he was just trying to intimidate them by putting more sanctions, more tariffs on them? How you can put these two pictures together? You want them to use dollar, and on the other hand, you want to put sanctions on them. Which is the main reason for which they have decided to run away from dollar.
Yes, I don't think he really thought that through, like he just doesn't think through a lot of other things, and it's not clear if he's ever going to carry out these threats. That's the whole problem with Trump. Trump is sort of like Erdogan, someone who just don't know where he stands, where he's going to go. And I think that's hurtful for the United States, just as Erdogan hurts his presence as president of Turkey, hurts Turkey. During his first decade, it's very different, but now I think that's how it is. But Trump, yes, if he wants to impose tariffs, 100% tariffs on all these countries, it's going to cause huge inflation in the United States. And then he also wants to kick out all of the immigrants and illegal immigrants, or the refugees, or whatever you want to call them. That's going to increase inflation. So how is he going to deal with that? So I find it difficult to imagine that he'll really do that. But Trump is a person who makes these threats. But also, I think it's a sign of U.S. vulnerability. I don't know how fast BRICS is going to be able to bring about change. I was speaking to a very smart Chinese and young Chinese scholar today about the Chinese currency, and that there are many difficulties for BRICS and for the Chinese to expand alternatives to the U.S. dollars. There are many challenges, but I think the very fact that Trump says this is a sign of U.S. vulnerability, and it only creates a further incentive for countries to protect themselves. Because if you're constantly threatening people, then they look for protection. And if you threaten them more so that they don't seek protection, you're only creating further incentive for them to seek that protection even more intensely than before.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great.
Ukrainian troops, who are still trying to hold out on Russian soil in Martinovka in the Kursk region, were raining by a heavy hail of incendiary ammunition, which covered the area of concentration of their manpower and equipment in the village. The Russian military channel released footage today, December 6, 2024, showing how a night barrage of 9 M22s incendiary ammunition, presumably fired by BM-21 Grad MLRS, is now falling on the positions of those fighting for Zelensky's officials and the Western collective. It seems that the hail of incendiary ammunition was aimed at the last foothold, where Ukrainians concentrated their troops in the village, and now the enemy's positions are suppressed by the resulting fire. In recent days, the Russian Grad MLRS has been diligently firing its rockets, which contain magnesium and other substances mixed in them, to set fire to the enemy's military ammunition and fuel sources. As in the footage, the Russian paratroopers Tula operate the Grad on Ukrainian formations in Kursk, precisely targeting manpower, equipment, fortifications, observation posts, and armor. This week, much of the Ukrainian and Western equipment was destroyed by paratroopers as they approached Martinovka. The footage shows a panoramic view of the village itself, which is being liberated by Russian troops, and New Kiev losses are being detected by drone vision. 2 destroyed howitzers are seen blocking the road, and a heavily damaged Canadian Rochelle Senator armored fighting vehicle, while drones search for another's by circling the village. Ukraine and the West have only advanced one step in the Kursk adventure with continued losses of life and equipment, and so far continue to be pushed back by Russian troops on the Kursk line, and it is believed that Martinovka will be liberated in days.
Military to leave the troops there. There are 900 to 1,000 troops. They are extremely vulnerable. Now, the ones across the border in Iraq have been shot at and have been damaged and wounded. That is the US troops. So why are they leaving these troops up there in Syria? Well, a considered decision was made to, well, leave them up there and let's see if we can let's see if some of them get killed, and that will be a pretext for us to do real damage to whoever killed them. Okay, there's no sense there except that they are helping to protect the extraction of the oil that we are stealing there, that Trump bragged about stealing, and actually some of that oil goes to Israel. So there is some utility to having those people up there, but the vulnerabilities far outweigh the benefits of keeping troops in Syria. Besides, they're not invited, huh? Okay, at least the Iraqis have asked us to leave, but they say, okay, you can stay a little longer. All right, you can stay a little longer. The Syrians never invited us. On the contrary, they have invited the Russians. So that should say something with respect to international law.
Larry, before we get into what the neocons are up to, didn't Trump in his first presidency order the military to get the heck out of Syria? And if he did, what happened?
He did. They ignored the order. They didn't carry it out. Look, the presence of U.S. troops in Syria is not just to protect the oil. It's also part of a longer range plan that actually started back, well, it predated 2011, but it started under Barack Obama in earnest to overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad, because they saw Assad as a supporter of Iran, and this is an indirect way to attack Iran, weaken Iran, prevent any supplies from transiting Syria that would wind up in the hands of Hezbollah. the real irony here is that the United States, in providing this support, which it was collecting weapons in Benghazi, it was throughout all of Libya. The weapons in Libya were then brought to Benghazi. They were shipped from Benghazi to Turkey, were given to the Turks. The Turks then distributed them to the radical Sunni Islamists, who are, let's call them, the theological descendants of Al Qaeda. The terrorists that attacked us on 9/11 begat, this will sound like something out of Genesis. Al Qaeda begat ISIS, ISIS begat Al Nusra, Al Nusra begat this Hayat Tahrir al Sham, which is right now carrying out that military operation. They are receiving from the United States indirectly training, intelligence, and weapons. And those weapons now are being used against the Shia and the Alawites and the Christians in Syria. So the United States now, think about this, wrap your brain around it. The United States is supplying weapons and lethal aid to the very terrorists that attacked us on 9/11, okay? That's how far we've fallen, and we're using our military to attack the Shia elements, the Alawite elements, the Syrian army that's trying to defeat those terrorists. You'd think we'd be lined up with Bashar al-Assad, but no. We're more concerned about Iran, who hasn't carried out a single major terrorist attack against the United States in the entire first quarter of this 21st century. Instead, we're providing weapons and aid to the very terrorists who have been attacking the West because they want to establish a global caliphate.
Ray, you have a great piece at antiwar.com. I think it came out yesterday. The neocons are up to it again. What is their possible justification for what Larry just described?
They've been doing it, as Larry said, before 2011, when the spring broke out in Damascus. We have been kind of letting ourselves be used as a tool of Israel. Now, Bashar al-Assad, not the nicest person in the world, but he is absolutely no threat to the United States. Okay, who is he a threat to? Well, I mean, just like Saddam Hussein seemed to be a threat to Israel, so with Bashar al-Assad. So what do? Well, we trained these rebels, moderate rebels, mind you. We showed that little clip of Lloyd Austin saying, "Well, we spent $500 million, but we got 4 or 5 good ones that's still in the fight." Okay, that's how we distributed our largesse. And why? To keep chaos going in Syria, to deprive the ability of other people to supply Hezbollah in Lebanon, and most of all, to make that area not a threat to Israel. I want to quote, there was a New York Times bureau chief in Jerusalem, Jody Ruderin. At the height of this first breakout in 2013, she went to senior Israeli officials, which she knew quite well. She said, "Now tell me, what's the preferred outcome of this internecine, or this Sunni Shia fighting here in Syria? Well, what's Israel's preferred outcome?" And they said, "Well, Jody, it's not it doesn't sound very good, but our preferred outcome is no outcome. As long as Sunni and Shia are at each other's throats, as long as they're hemorrhaging their capabilities here, Israel has nothing to fear from Syria." That's the name of the game as far as Israel's concerned. And it's impossible to look at U.S. policy toward Syria without thinking that we're joined at the hip as Israel. We're doing Israel's bidding by arming these moderate rebels, even if we're going to get 4 or 5 for the $500 million we invested in that particular tranche.
Larry, can we expect any change in American policy in Syria under Donald Trump, or will it be more of the same, notwithstanding Trump's campaign promises?
No, I don't think there'll be much of a change, unless Trump wakes up. But unfortunately, he surrounded himself with people like Waltz, and this clown Sebastian Gorka and Marco Rubio. They're not going to do. They see this as Ray pointed out. This is doing Israel's bidding, and remember, Israel is actually it wants to quote destroy Hezbollah. It doesn't want to do a thing about HTS. The Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that group, even though that group is listed as one of the top 10 terrorist groups attacking international targets over the last 10 years. That's who we're supporting. Yeah, and we said, well, we're not supporting them directly. Oh, no. We give it to Turkey, we give it to Ukraine, and then we use them as a cutout. That way we go, oh, gee, we don't know anything about this. No, we're absolutely up to our eyeballs in this. And now we've seen that it is expanding with the reemergence of the white helmets. These guys are a British intelligence or outfit. They're a front group, and they're out there to spread misinformation, to create false flags. They tried it, 11 years ago to pretend that the Syrian army had launched a chemical weapons attack when in fact it was al-Nusra. It was the Western-backed terrorists that were launching it in order to try to create an incident that would justify further Western intervention. But this has a broader play beyond just Syria, Israel, and Turkey. This is also designed in part because the West genuinely believes that Russia, by providing military support to Syria, it will weaken its effort in Ukraine. I think they're mistaken in that, but that's part of this plan as well.
Ray, I want to jump to South Korea. Is there any geopolitical significance to the declaration of martial law, which only lasted for 6 hours, or is it just a factor and a consequence of domestic South Korean politics?
It was bizarre, truly bizarre. I think that Yoon is not long for staying in office. And after all, he's one of our, he's our Zelensky out there in South Korea. He's a peg to this big alliance we're trying to construct against China. If he falls, there is enough ferment in South Korea. There's enough burgeoning knowledge as to how they've been used and reluctance to keep in this little close alliance with Japan and to allow for some substantial change in South Korea. That's the danger as the people in the White House see it. But South Korea has changed for the better in the past. I have some hope that this will lead to a change in government and a change in attitude toward getting along with other people like the North Koreans.
Larry, why do we have 28,000 troops there?
Hey, got to keep that. The military industrial complex needs them. If we don't have them there, how do we justify an $850 billion budget? That budget is helping sustain over 750 military bases around the world. So we got to, with every base, there comes a command position. Got lots of officers that have to get those command positions in so that they can get promoted. This is part of the gross corruption of our so-called national security strategy. This isn't about defending against communism or authoritarianism or whatever. This is about grift. This is about padding the pockets of Washington lawmakers who get donations from Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, and then those companies in turn, they hire retired generals out to come in, put them on the payroll, put them on the board, give them a sinecure, and then the money keeps flowing back and forth, and every year gets bigger and bigger. There is absolutely no reason to have those troops in South Korea.
Do you think they might be there because of some planned military aggression against China, Larry?
No. I mean, they wouldn't even be a speed bump in the road if they went involved with China. 26,000, that's nothing. Look at by comparison, Russia's killing that many Ukrainians in 1 month. Okay, so this is all they are, potential cannon fodder. Now this is we pretend that they are there to keep the peace, to be a tripwire for the future, But no, it's corruption, pure and simple. It's a money making machine for the Washington politicians and the defense industry, and those soldiers are just cogs in the wheel, or as Roger Waters, his song, just another brick in the wall.
Another brick in the wall. We're going to switch to Ukraine, but first I want to play a clip from the person that Larry Wilkerson says is the worst Secretary of State since Thomas Jefferson, which of course means the worst Secretary of State in history. He says there's $50 billion he still wants to send to Ukraine. You'll hear him say this. Chris, cut number 10.
We're focused in very practical, concrete ways, really on three things: making sure that it has the money, the resources it needs to sustain its economy and to sustain its defense. We've now managed, on the basis of the frozen sovereign assets, the Russian assets that are frozen, to get $50 billion to Ukraine that will be going out the door in the coming weeks, both from the United States and Europe, and that will carry Ukraine for some time into next year. Second, munitions and everything that goes with that, whether it's air defenses, whether it's missiles, whether it's armored vehicles. We're working in a very determined way, again, to make sure for many months ahead that Ukraine will have what it needs. The United States is pushing out the door everything that we can. But beyond that, we have this process long established, Secretary Austin established at Ramstein, to make sure that we're fully coordinated with allies and partners. And that's exactly what we're doing. And we spent time, again, talking about what the needs are and how each of us can play a part in filling them. And then finally, mobilization. This is critical because even with the money, even with the munitions, there have to be people on the front lines to deal with the Russian aggression. Ukraine has hard decisions to make about further mobilization, but these are necessary decisions. We have a commitment, though, for every person, every soldier that Ukraine mobilizes. We're committed to making sure that they have the training and the equipment they need to effectively defend the country.
I mean, not only is much of this absolutely untrue, Ray, it's as if he's been asleep the past 2 years and is utterly ignorant of the slaughter that the Ukrainian young men have endured and the thin ice that the military is on now. I'll let you take it from there, Ray.
Well, Judge, he did mention the 18 and 19, 20 and 21-year-olds who have escaped the carnage so far. Now, Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan are adamant that they be recruited, that they be wrapped up and sent into the battle or into the fight, as Lloyd Austin has taught them to say. My God, how cynical. The battle is lost. All these guys want to do is go out of office saying we gave Zelensky everything he asked for. The only problem was he was reluctant to draft the 18-19. We drafted the 18-19 volunteered when Vietnam. Well, these guys don't know anything. They never volunteered for Vietnam. They never put on a uniform. So it's terribly cynical that they're accusing the Ukrainians of not being able to use our weaponry. And Blinken has done that explicitly because they don't have enough troops. Well, 18, it's just really, you say, the carnage. Well, most people think 500 to 600,000 troops in Ukraine have been killed, right? That's a lot. I mean, for God's sake, when peace was at hand after the first 6 weeks and we put the kibosh on it together with Boris Johnson, I mean, how do you live with a conscience, if you have a conscience, about those things?
Larry, before you weigh in on what we just heard from Secretary Blinken, I want you to hear what President Zelensky said late last week on November 29th. Chris, cut number 1.
If we want to stop the hot stage of the war, we should take under NATO umbrella the territory of Ukraine that we have under our control. That's what we need to do fast. And then Ukraine can get back the other part of its territory diplomatically.
So he's drinking from the same water fountain as Blinken. If he honestly thinks, after all of this, after all the death and all the slaughter and all the loss of territory and the steady and inexorable march of the Russian military, that the rest of Ukraine can, quote, be taken under the NATO umbrella. This is madness, Larry.
Judge, they ain't drinking from the water fountain, man. They're doing vodka shooters, dude. You know, they're lit up. They're intoxicated and not in a good way. You know, they need to pay attention that, last night, Thursday, we saw finally Tucker Carlson's interview with Lavrov. And that was preceded by Sergei Rybkov, the number 2 member, the deputy in the Russian foreign ministry. Zelensky, Blinken, and the West better damn well pay attention to what they're saying. When you listen to what Rybkov, when he told the CNN, I give CNN credit. They finally actually did some journalism.
Larry, hang on, because I have the clip for you.
Oh,
Chris,
okay.
Cut number 14.
Oreshnik is not a strategic ballistic missile. It's an intermediate range missile, which was tested in combat, and the results are known for people in Kiev, for people in Washington, in Brussels, and of course in Moscow. We used this as not just a messenger of a sense, but we use this to test what we really have in terms of our growing and additional capabilities in this very crucial area. Let me tell you that if not for the Trump 1 administration that simply destroyed INF Treaty, which served well interests of both US and Russia for several decades, then there would be no Oreshnik in our hands. We will still be restrained from our capability to develop such weapons, but okay, it's gone. And now what we have. We do not complain about missed opportunities. We look forward. We're very sure that we will reach all our goals and objectives through our action on the ground, and all the objectives of the special military operation will be achieved.
According to Gil Doctorow, Sergei Rybakov is the smartest, strongest, and most tenacious of Lavrov's deputies. Go ahead, Larry.
Well, almost a year ago today, I was standing next to Pepe Escobar, and Pepe and I were talking with Mr. Rybkov. And then we had sat down, and there were 14 of us around the table. Alistair Cook was there as well, Pepe, myself, meeting with Sergei Rybkov and a couple of others. Dmitry Symes chaired the event. It was really an informal discussion. What Rybkov made clear back then, and he reiterated in this interview with CNN, he says, "We've never been at a more dangerous time in the entire history of the relations between Russia and the United States, including the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, because, as he told us, at least back then, there were communications between the presidents, between Kennedy and between Khrushchev. They were talking, at least Kennedy's brother, Robert F. Kennedy, was communicating with the Russian ambassador and the head of the KGB here in the United States." And Rybakov made clear, there's no talking going on. There's no communication. This is extremely dangerous. And he made clear, and it was reiterated by his boss later, Lavrov, in his conversation with Tucker, that Russia's not playing. We have made our views very, very clear. We will defend ourselves. It's no different than if Russia was providing weapons to Mexico and that Mexico was shelling San Antonio, Austin, Albuquerque, Phoenix, and San Diego. If that was taking place, we would view that as an act of war, and we would be compelled to respond militarily. That is why this is so damn dangerous. And Blinken and Zelensky and Trump aren't paying attention.
Ray, I think Larry's 100% correct. And to make matters worse, General Kellogg, who has been indicated by President-elect Trump will be his emissary for Ukraine and Russia, supports the continuing arming of the Ukrainian military. How the hell can that be? And how can Trump end this war in 24 hours if the people he's going to appoint have the same mindset? Rubio, Waltz, Gorka, General Kellogg, as the people they're replacing, Ray?
Well, Judge, I think it's a little premature to dismiss Kellogg. He's got some plans that could form the basis of a give and take with the Russians. I think that he will show some flexibility, as I think Putin will, once they finally start talking to each other. Okay, there's been no talking for 2.5 years. All right, so I wouldn't rule him out. Now, I'd like to comment on what Larry said about Ryabkov. You know, he stressed, you'll recall, that this is not a strategic weapon. No. What's it all about? Well, strategic weapons are ipso facto nuclear weapons. And Putin made a statement in Astana, I think it was the 28th of November, which has gotten them into some trouble, I believe, okay? What he said is, and I'll read it here, military and technical experts note that when it's used in a concentrated, massive strike, that is, using several Oreshnik missiles simultaneously, resulting impact is comparable in power to that of a nuclear weapon, period, end quote. Whoa, okay. Now, I won't go into semantics, and I'm not a scientist and I'm not an engineer. I mean, this is a layman, a president, but he's comparing it to the power of a nuclear weapon, not the fallout or anything. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that the US can go back and say to Russia, look, you said that if we mounted anything that was nuclear capable, like on an F-16 or anything like that, you would shoot it down right away. So beware. We know this is the equivalent of a nuclear weapon, even though you say it's not strategic, even you do say that it's nuclear capable. So I think Putin this is very interesting because the full text of his speech was taken off the web, taken off the president of the Russian Federation's website, okay? So this business about Putin crowing about if you use several of these Oreshniks together, that, quote, the resulting impact is comparable in power to a nuclear weapon. Well, okay, it is. I mean, it doesn't have the burst and the heat and all that kind of stuff, but that's semantics. He's saying, look, it can be just as powerful as a nuclear weapon. And I think they're reluctant to give the West a chance to say, okay, you got something as powerful as a nuclear weapon. Next time you do something, we're going to use only thing we got comparable, which is nuclear weapons. I think this is very dicey in the semantics now. Putin said it, he's downplaying it now, and you get people like Ryabkov always saying it's strategic. It's not a strategic weapon. It can't do the kinds of things that strategic, namely nuclear weapons, do.
Larry, I'll give you the last word. Biden's people obviously don't understand the Russians and don't believe what President Putin says. Is there any reason to expect different thinking under Donald Trump?
No, there's no sign that anybody on Trump's side either understands the Russians, or even wants to make an attempt to understand the Russians. You know, Judge, what's shocking, you, Ray, and I, we're all sort of children of the Cold War. We grew up in an era where we were taught, starting in elementary school, that we faced a threat from international communism, and we had to stop international communism at any cost. And that's why we got involved with the stupid war in Vietnam in part, as well as trying to protect France's colonial, his colony possessions. But with the implosion of the Soviet Union, all of a sudden that international communist threat went away. And yet, despite that going away, despite the fact that Vladimir Putin presides over a country that emphasizes its Christian faith as the primary thing that drives that country, as it emphasizes the importance of family values, healthy relationships of husband and wife with children. Yeah, very traditional, very 1950ish of them. Yet the West persists in portraying Russia as this enormous threat that we must counter at any cost and at any expense. It's madness. It's utter madness, and there's no rationale for it. We keep trying to construct one. And what's really going on is the reason we hate Putin so much, at least our leaders and the business folks, is Putin stopped them from raping Russia of its natural resources, stopped the West from seizing the oil, seizing the gas, seizing the gold, seizing the uranium. And it's that greed, that lust that drives us in the West. It's nothing that Putin's doing. And just instead of recognizing that, and shame on Trump, shame on everyone that he's appointed, because none of them are willing to acknowledge that. Instead, they persist with this nonsense that somehow Russia represents a threat to us. Russia does not represent a threat to the United States in any form or fashion.
Gentlemen, a great segment. I know we've all had a long and tiring week, and we just went around the globe.
Well, to finish the show here, certainly last but absolutely not least, the story that has really, I think, captivated much of the world, the martial law declaration in South Korea by President Yoon, and the response of the South Korean people that seems to have beaten that back, at least for now. But, I'm not going to give you the details. We're going to bring in someone who really knows what they're talking about. Daehan Song, who leads the contents team of the International Strategy Center, is also a part of the No Cold War Collective and an associate at the Korea Policy Institute, is here with us. Daehan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me on the show, Eugene.
Listen, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. There's so much to say here. I don't even know where to start. Maybe I'll just start here. What was behind this attempted martial law? What was Yoon hoping to accomplish? And what does it say that it was so, reversed so quickly? Because it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, just immense popular outrage in South Korea.
Sure. I think a lot of us were pretty shocked when the martial law was called. I was at a funeral, and I remember that just everybody was like, oh my God, on the phones, it's just popping and saying Yoon has just declared martial law, right? None of us believed it. The reversal, of course, has to do with the mobilization of people, right? People just mobilized rapidly. When I dropped off those people, they immediately just rushed to the National Assembly, right? Activists, organizers, just common people, right? I've heard that, stories about delivery drivers that just stopped their deliveries and they just rushed over. People that were just relaxing at home when they saw the declaration, they just rushed over. And basically within an hour, people were already trickling in. And by 12 a.m., there were thousands of people already in front of the National Assembly. And of course, it was these people in front of the National Assembly that actually prevented the armored trucks from entering the National Assembly grounds, and basically struggled with the Special Forces soldiers to prevent them from blocking the vote that happened, that actually rescinded the martial law, right? A lot of them outside were chanting, abolish martial law, down with the dictatorship, all of this while the assembly members were voting to revoke the martial law, right? So there's also a lot of reporting that says that the soldiers that were mobilized, a lot of them afterwards, as they demobilized, they apologized to the crowd, all of this. I think all of this is only possible because people so rapidly showed up and showed that President Yoon is illegitimate, that nobody supports this declaration of martial law, that is completely ridiculous. Yeah, and I think so. The people, in effect, played a crucial role. As regards to like what led Yoon to do this, basically he was backed into a corner, right? He was rapidly becoming a lame duck president, right? A budget bill that he was trying to pass, which would have increased his discretionary spending for the presidential office, for the prosecutor's office, which he controls, right? A lot of this was being blocked in the National Assembly. Also, like a lot of the accusations around stock manipulation and bribery that around his wife, around the first lady, were also just dominating the news, becoming even bigger. And also, it was just a matter of time before there was going to be a vote in the National Assembly that would have overturned Yoon's veto that he had been exercising on the special investigation on her and on him that would likely have passed the National Assembly. So he was basically backed into a corner, and I think he just thought that this was his only way.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things I think is important here, and at least from my view outside looking in, about people mobilizing so rapidly is people in, South Korea, they know what martial law means, and the long struggle over many years to have, the right to have elections, democratic rights, the many people who were killed. I was hoping you could just talk a little bit about that as well, because I think most people in the United States, at least, are pretty ignorant about, I think, that period of South Korea's history.
Sure. The last time that martial law was declared was in 1980, May 17, 1980. And this was basically against a lot of the protests by students that started with students and kind of spread to the larger public that were calling for democracy, right, to the end of the dictatorship. And of course, like direct presidential elections happened in 1988 amidst protests, democratization protests. And so, yeah, it was wild, right? Nobody thought that within a lot of the younger people, nobody thought that within their lifetimes, in this day of age of like in Korea, like somebody would declare martial law, right? And of course, I think very important is that 1980 martial law was what prolonged the dictatorship, right? And of course, what they used to justify it was that there's like North Korean infiltration, that there's like anti-state forces, and of course, Yoon was doing that again this time. And the thing that both of them have in common is that there was no threat, right? There was no North Korean infiltration. It was a complete. It was just a way to basically increase their legitimacy, hold on to power. Right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's amazing really that we would do this. I was myself shocked given that history and everything that had gone past, but here we are. It seems like President Yoon is trying to hang on, and interestingly enough, his party, which was leadership at least, was critical. Now is saying, well, we're going to defend him from being impeached. I mean, you can't predict the future, so it's hard to say. I mean, do you think that is tenable, or given how sort of extreme this step was, that Yoon will ultimately have to step down?
Sure. Well, I think a couple of things is important to know, right? For example, the Conservative Party already had two presidents, or one president impeached while in office and incarcerated, President Park Geun-hye, and another president, Lee Myung-bak, imprisoned after he left office, right? So if Yoon is also in prison, that's a massive existential blow to them, right? So even if they're acknowledging that declaring martial law, that there were it was insufficient grounds to declare martial law, despite that, they're also saying that they're not gonna vote for the impeachment motion, right? And I think at this point, what is key is people's mobilization, right? Like right after, on Thursday, right after martial law was lifted, there were protests that were happening in Seoul. And these protests need to keep getting bigger. There's going to be a protest every night, and it's going to culminate on Saturday. when people from all across the country are going to be coming in and congregating in Gwanghwamun, which is Seoul's main plaza, right? And I think a lot of this is just reminiscent of the 2016, 2017 candlelight protests that brought down President Park Geun-hye that was in power at that time, right? And it's just clear that politicians will only move when there's sufficient people in the streets, when there's sufficient protests, right, and rallies to keep. There's so many like bureaucratic moments, bureaucratic pitfalls that could prevent the process from happening, right? And of course, these are all safeguards to power, right? But I think when people are there and keep pushing the process forward, I think that's what's gonna make sure that corruption and abuse of power are like held accountable.
No, I think that's a very relevant point. The State Department has made their announcement today saying the U.S.-South Korea relationship transcends any particular president. So I think, there's sort of, I don't know if that's distance or not, but certainly seeming to say that they maybe are not going to rally to Yoon's cause. I mean, I wonder if what you think the repercussions could potentially be. I mean, obviously, President Yoon has been very much in lockstep with the United States on, the military issues in Northeast Asia, other pieces like that. If him being in turmoil, possibly being moved off the scene by a popular protest movement, how that might affect some of the geopolitical elements that have been heavily pushed by him, the Biden administration, and the Japanese government over the past few years.
Sure. I think the Yoon administration, almost like from the beginning, was losing a lot of popularity and legitimacy because he started. There's a whole history of like Japan never have been held accountable for its war crimes and its during colonialism, during its imperialist war. They weren't held accountable, and of course that's connected to a whole long history also of like U.S. intervention in the region and the U.S. basically allowing Japan off the hook, in order to prop up a power in the region that could be anti-communist power, right? But I guess the impact would be big, right? Because the last time there was a shift from a conservative to a liberal president, that's also a period that opened up a lot of like rapprochement with North Korea, right? When inter-Korean relationships started to improve. And that's also when basically Moon Jae-in that came after Park Geun-hye, right, came with the mandate to change Korean society. And one of the things he started doing was he started building peaceful relations, improving relations with North Korea. And of course, that paved the way for Trump to be able to have the different summits with Kim Jong-un. And that could also be a likely possibility, right? I think one important point to note, though, is that I think at the end of the day, basically the people need to be out in the streets. Progressive movements need to mobilize around around a progressive agenda that does involve a more balanced approach in the region as opposed to Yoon's such a strong, heavy United States centered approach that also involves reaching out to North Korea, trying to repair a lot of the damage that was done under the Yoon administration. And just also pushing a lot of progressive agendas around democratic reforms, right? This is the second time that it's happening, right? It's like it happened in 2016, it's happening again in 2024. Like there has to be democratic reforms to limit the power of the president that is just too excessive, to limit the power of the prosecutor's office. These democratic reforms need to happen to prevent this from happening again.
Well, we're going to be watching this closely. This is, I think one of the most interesting stories that's out there in the world today. And we really appreciate you, Dae-Han Song of the International Strategy Center, being willing to join us here on the Freedom Side.
rebels, armed to the teeth, were fighting for months to free a president from captivity. And then, without warning, they surrender. What the hell just happened? Is it the end of the rebellion, or are we missing something bigger here? This isn't just a surrender. It's the kind of move that could change everything in Niger. Here's a question you might not expect. What if this surrender is the first big sign that the West's hold on Africa is slipping? Yeah, we said it. This is no ordinary story about rebels putting down their weapons. There's more at stake here than a bunch of insurgents deciding to quit. This is about power, geopolitics, and the quiet reshaping of the Sahel region. And it's going to blow your mind. Let's get started. In August 2023, Niger, a country in West Africa, was thrust into political upheaval. But this wasn't an ordinary crisis. It was a much-needed shift towards stability. President Mohamed Bazoum, who had taken office in April 2021, was ousted by a group of military leaders who were fed up with his inability to address Niger's growing instability. Bazoum's government, despite its promises of democracy and reform, had failed to deliver on key issues like economic development, security, and fighting corruption. The people's trust in Bazoum was waning, and the situation in Niger was growing increasingly untenable. The military, stepping in as a voice for the people, decided to take action. Bazoum's rule had become a puppet regime, propped up by foreign powers and increasingly disconnected from the needs and will of the Nigerian people. Despite promises of progress, his leadership lacked the political acumen and authority needed to bring real change. The military coup that followed was not an act of selfish power grabbing. It was an urgent necessity to restore order, uphold national sovereignty, and take control of a country at risk of further chaos. The junta, led by General Tiani, swiftly and decisively acted in the best interests of the nation. The junta's move was not about destabilizing the country. It was about stabilizing it. Niger's democracy had been a facade, and the military's intervention was a necessary step to preserve the nation's future. With Bazoum in power, Niger was on the brink of collapse, suffering from widespread corruption, a growing insurgency, and increasing dependence on foreign aid. The coup was a restoration of Nigerian sovereignty, breaking the chains of external influence, especially from Western powers, who had been meddling in the country's internal affairs for too long. As the junta took control, it quickly became clear that not everyone agreed with this much-needed change. Enter the Patriotic Liberation Front FPL, a group of rebels, many of whom were former supporters of Bazoum's government or military personnel loyal to the ousted president. They were unwilling to accept the clear and legitimate will of the people. Their protest wasn't about restoring democracy. It was about preserving the old order, a government that had failed to deliver on its promises. The FPL's mission was clear. They wanted to return Bazoum to power, but this was not a fight for democracy. It was a battle for the status quo. Their fight wasn't against tyranny. It was against the necessary transformation that the junta was bringing. The FPL's resistance was rooted in a rejection of the military's rightful intervention to fix what had been broken by a government that had failed its people. The FPL wasn't just a ragtag group of rebels. They were disillusioned remnants of a discredited government. They sought to undermine the legitimate military rule, to disrupt the stability that was finally being restored to Niger. Their campaign to restore Bazoum wasn't about democracy. It was about returning to a disastrous status quo that had already failed. The demands of the FPL were simple but misguided: the restoration of Bazoum and the return to the old democratic system. But to the military junta, this was a flawed vision. Bazoum's government was a failure, and the junta was fighting to remove the chains of a broken system. The FPL's protest wasn't just a fight to bring back a democratically elected president. It was an attempt to keep in place a corrupt, ineffective leadership that was not serving the people. What the FPL failed to realize is that Niger's future could not be built on the weak foundation of Bazoum's leadership. The junta's intervention wasn't about seizing power. It was about restoring order, ending corruption, and reclaiming national independence. The junta had no interest in maintaining power for themselves. They wanted to give the country back to the people, to break free from the shackles of failed leadership and external influence. In their eyes, the FPL's fight was not for the future of Niger, it was a battle to preserve the past. A past that was marked by mismanagement, foreign dependence, and an inability to address Niger's real challenges. As the FPL began to rally, they sought to disrupt the junta's control by targeting military installations and key infrastructure. They hoped that by disrupting the military's ability to govern, they could force the junta to step down and restore Bazoum's presidency. But what the FPL didn't realize is that they were fighting not just the junta, but the will of the people. The people of Niger were tired of the same old leadership, and the junta's rise to power was a response to years of frustration. The FPL wasn't just fighting against the military, they were fighting against the reality that Niger needed change. By sabotaging infrastructure and launching attacks on key targets, the FPL sought to undermine stability. But the junta, with the support of the people, wasn't going to let that happen. They were focused on securing a future for Niger that was independent, self-sustaining, and free from the influence of foreign powers that had kept the country in a state of political stagnation. After months of resistance, the FPL made the difficult decision to surrender. This wasn't a loss, it was the realization that their cause was flawed from the start. The military had secured control of Niger and restored stability, and the FPL's inability to gain public support and their growing internal divisions made it clear that the rebellion was doomed to fail.
And staying on with West Africa, in Niger, the army has dealt a major blow to the rebels fighting to overthrow the military rule. 9 members of an armed rebel group called the Patriotic Liberation Front, or the FPL, surrendered on Monday as they handed over their weapons and ammunition. They were seeking the release of Niger's ousted President Mohamed Bazoum.
And what impact did this surrender have on the government? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. When the Patriotic Liberation PL decided to surrender, it wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a game changer for the future of Niger and the military junta that took power. This act of surrender carried immense significance, not just for the rebels, but for the broader political landscape in Niger. The junta's control over the country is now more solidified than ever before, and the consequences of this surrender will ripple through the country and beyond, shaping the path forward. For one, the loss of a major opposition group like the FPL means that the junta now faces far fewer organized threats. The FPL, which had been one of the most prominent rebel factions challenging the junta's power, represented the last vestiges of a resistance movement hoping to bring back the ousted President Bazoum. The military now has a clear path to implement their reforms without significant resistance. This surrender has effectively eliminated the primary challenge to the junta's rule, ensuring that the military leaders can now focus on governance and security without the constant pressure of insurgency on their backs. But it's not just about eliminating the enemy. The military's response to this surrender is critical. This moment is more than just a victory on the battlefield. It's a clear message to anyone still thinking about resistance. The junta is in control, and their power is unassailable. The rebels, after months of defiance, recognized that their efforts were ultimately futile against a well-prepared, highly structured military. For those still lingering in opposition, this defeat signals that any further rebellion is doomed from the start. The junta, with its stronghold on the military, can now focus on solidifying its rule, shoring up alliances, and ensuring that no further insurgency can gain traction. This also speaks volumes about the junta's internal cohesion. Despite the challenges of running a country that had just experienced a coup, the military has proven itself capable of keeping its ranks united. The surrender of the FPL is indicative of the junta's strategic effectiveness, showing that they didn't just have the military might to fight the rebels, but the political acumen to manage the country effectively amid resistance. The rebellion's collapse suggests that the junta's leadership is both resilient and well-calculated, ensuring a smooth transition from resistance to control. With fewer rebel factions to contend with, the junta now has a chance to rebuild the nation without the constant threat of insurgency undermining their efforts. The immediate priority will likely be securing the country and stabilizing the economy. The junta can now invest resources into rebuilding infrastructure, addressing economic instability, and pushing for foreign investment, all without the distraction of an active rebellion. The end of significant resistance means that the junta can confidently take the first steps toward securing the long-term future of Niger, both internally and on the international stage. However, the importance of this surrender goes beyond just the immediate future. The mood in Niger has shifted, and public opinion is likely to follow suit. Nigerians who were once skeptical of the junta's legitimacy are now seeing the power dynamics shift decisively in their favor. The fact that the rebels, who once threatened to bring the junta down, have given up speaks volumes about the growing confidence in the junta's authority. The military's ability to defeat an armed rebellion sends a strong message to the population. Their power is secure, and the country is moving towards a new era of stability. While the junta's victory in this rebellion is significant, it also sets a precedent for other military-led governments in the region. The successful consolidation of power in Niger could inspire similar military takeovers in other parts of West Africa, where unstable political conditions and public dissatisfaction with elected governments are fueling discontent. The junta's victory shows that military intervention, though controversial, can be an effective response to the failures of democratic governance. This has regional implications, as other military factions might look to Niger as a model for successfully seizing power and maintaining control. There's also the matter of international influence. The junta's ability to withstand not only local resistance, but also pressure from foreign powers like France and the West strengthens its position in the global arena. While some external actors might disapprove of the coup, the junta's ability to establish control without significant foreign intervention speaks to its growing autonomy and self-sufficiency. Niger, once seen as a small player in Africa's geopolitical landscape, is now positioning itself as a force that is capable of standing on its own without outside interference. With the FPL's surrender, the military junta finds itself in a position of unprecedented strength. It has defeated the largest and most organized rebel group, secured its grip on power, and is now free to build the future of Niger without significant internal opposition. The country's road to recovery is now clear, and the junta is ready to push forward with reforms, stability measures, and economic development. This moment marks a new chapter in Niger's history, a chapter that could serve as a blueprint for other nations facing similar challenges. Niger's future now lies in the hands of the military, and the junta's ability to handle this responsibility will be crucial for the country's long-term success. The FPL's surrender is just the beginning of a new era in Niger, where military leadership can bring about the stability and progress that democracy failed to deliver. But one thing must not be ignored here, and that is external influence. Because this isn't just about a local conflict in Niger. This is about a geopolitical struggle with major foreign interests at play. While the military junta is focused on securing Niger's future, they're not just fighting against local insurgents. They're also up against powerful international forces with their agendas. And right now, the most important shift is happening in the realm of international alliances. First, let's talk about France, the former colonial power that had long held sway over Niger. For years, France has been considered Niger's partner, especially in the context of military and security cooperation. But after the coup, France was kicked out, and the junta made it clear. They no longer want France's interference in Niger's affairs. Why? Because the junta believes that France and other Western powers have been major players in keeping Niger in a cycle of political instability and dependency. The military junta sees the West as an unreliable partner that has only exacerbated Niger's problems, making it harder for the country to chart its course and solve its issues on its terms. So, what does this have to do with the FPL and their surrender? It's simple. The FPL was fighting to restore a government that was backed by the West, particularly France. Bazoum's government was a product of Western influence, a puppet regime that enjoyed support from foreign powers, especially France, and relied on them for military and financial assistance. The FPL's cause wasn't just a local one. They were aligned with Western-backed interests, fighting for the return of a government that was part of a broader Western sphere of influence in the Sahel. But now, things have changed. As the junta's anti-West stance grows stronger and Russia moves in with increased influence, the geopolitical game in Niger has shifted. The junta is looking for new alliances, and Russia's growing presence in the Sahel has made it clear. Western influence is on the decline, and Russian support is on the rise. This power shift has forced the FPL to reconsider their position. They may have initially hoped for Western intervention, but as the situation evolves, they've realized that Russia's rise changes everything. The FPL's surrender could very well be an acknowledgement that Western powers, once their allies, are no longer able to help them. The FPL might have recognized that their fight was doomed from the start. Without the backing of France and the West, their rebellion lost its strategic value. Russia, after all, is on the rise in Africa and particularly in the Sahel, while the West is increasingly perceived as part of the problem, a force that kept Niger entangled in conflict instead of allowing the country to forge its path. So, why did the FPL surrender? One of the key factors might just be the realization that Russia's influence was growing and they were losing their Western backing. While the junta has made a strong move towards Russian support, the FPL, on the other hand, was still tied to the Western Bloc, fighting for a government that was increasingly isolated and disconnected from the realities on the ground. This isn't just a local rebellion, it's a proxy battle in a broader geopolitical conflict. The FPL's surrender can be seen as a recognition that their original cause, supported by Western powers, had become untenable. The shift in allegiances, from the West to Russia, has made it clear that the game in Niger has fundamentally changed, and the FPL, now aware that they had no chance without foreign backing, chose to step down. The surrender of the FPL is significant, but its implications go far beyond just Niger. This moment signals a broader geopolitical shift in the region. The influence of Russia in the Sahel has been growing, and with the junta aligning itself with Russian interests, it could catalyze further shifts in power dynamics across Africa. Niger's military leaders are not just focused on internal politics. They are actively seeking new alliances that can help them strengthen their sovereignty and free themselves from the grip of Western influence. The FPL's surrender, then, is not just about the defeat of one rebellion. It's a reflection of the changing geopolitics in Africa. The junta is embracing new partnerships, and the West's influence is being challenged. With Russia's involvement on the rise, this marks the beginning of a new phase for Niger, and for many other countries in the region that have been weary of Western interference. The balance of power in Africa is shifting, and the junta's alignment with Russia signals the dawning of a new era, one where Africa's future is shaped by African leaders, not foreign powers. The big question now is, where does Niger go from here? The junta isn't just looking at a temporary win, they've taken full control of the situation. The surrender of the FPL doesn't just mark the end of one chapter, it marks the beginning of a new political era for Niger. This isn't a setback for the junta. It's a decisive victory that allows them to move forward with the reconstruction and stabilization of the country. In the wake of this surrender, the junta is now firmly in charge, and their position has never been stronger. There will undoubtedly be some internal challenges and opposition groups, but the reality is clear. The junta has shown its strength. This is no longer a fragile government trying to hold on. It's a military leadership that has effectively secured the country's future, one that operates with the will of the people, who are increasingly recognizing that stability and independence lie in the hands of their leaders, not foreign-backed, ineffective governments. So, what do you take away from all of this? Do you think Africa is winning? Let us know in the comments section. Do you see this as a win or the start of a new fight for sovereignty? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody
Izizi Africa, your premier source for in-depth analysis of African affairs. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that you could only see on this channel. Yes, You heard me right. Get ready to uncover the truth about Ibrahim Traore's fearless special forces, which is playing a discreet and frontal role in defending Burkina Faso. Are you ready to explore the hidden world of elite warriors who are reshaping the security landscape of West Africa? Buckle up, because we're about to take you on a thrilling journey through the heart of Burkina Faso's military revolution. The dawn of a new era. Ibrahim Traore's vision. Picture this. It's New Year's Day, 2023. The air is thick with anticipation as Captain Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso's young and charismatic leader, takes the podium. The nation holds its breath, waiting to hear his plan to tackle the insurgency that has gripped 60% of the country. Traore's words ring out, clear and determined. My fellow Burkinabe, today marks the beginning of a new chapter in our nation's history. We will no longer stand idle as our land is torn apart. Today, I announce the formation of an elite special forces unit, trained and equipped to defend our sovereignty and protect our people. Let's hear some more from him. It is an honor and a pleasure to address you as we approach the new year, 2024. To the people of Burkina Faso, both at home and abroad, and to our friends and partners, I extend my heartfelt wishes for a happy new year. Let us give thanks to God for allowing us to witness this day, marking the end of 2023. Let us also pray for those who sacrificed their lives for Burkina Faso's independence and the reconquest of our territory. May their souls rest in peace on this free land. We also pray for the recovery of those injured while defending our freedom, and express solidarity with the internally displaced persons forced to leave their homes due to the ongoing struggles. The year 2023 was marked by a deep analysis of Burkina Faso's challenges. This diagnosis highlighted the issues undermining our nation and led to decisive actions to break the chains of imperialism and neocolonialism. As the saying goes, you cannot hope to recover what you lost by seeking help from the one who took it. Before we continue, just a gentle reminder to like and share our videos. Also, subscribe to the channel to stay informed on the latest African economic, political, and social developments, and explore how global geopolitics impact the continent. Now let's continue. But what led to this momentous decision? Let's rewind a bit. Before Traore took power from Henri Damiba in September 2022, Burkina Faso was in crisis. Insurgent groups had overrun vast swathes of the country, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The people were crying out for change, for action, for hope. Traore, a 34-year-old captain at the time, emerged as the face of this change. His background in special forces and his first-hand experience fighting insurgents in the north made him uniquely qualified to understand the challenges facing the nation. His decision to create a new special forces unit wasn't just a military strategy. It was a bold statement of intent, a promise to the Burkinabe people that their government would stop at nothing to ensure their safety. Now here's a question for you, our viewers. Do you think the formation of these special forces was a necessary step? Or is there another way to address the security challenges facing Burkina Faso? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Special Forces, the global elite. But what exactly are special forces, and why are they so crucial in modern warfare? Let's break it down. Special forces, often called the tip of the spear, are elite military units trained to perform high-risk, specialized operations. These aren't your average soldiers. They're the best of the best, selected through grueling processes that push human endurance to its limits. Think of them as the military's Swiss Army knife, versatile, precise, and always ready for action. Their missions can range from counterinsurgency operations and hostage rescues to intelligence gathering in hostile territories. They're trained to operate in small teams, often behind enemy lines, with minimal support. The selection process for special forces is notoriously tough. Candidates must demonstrate exceptional physical fitness, mental resilience, and problem-solving skills. But it's not just about brawn. Emotional intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to work in high-pressure situations are equally important. Training for special forces is intense and continuous. It covers a wide range of skills, including advanced weapons handling, survival techniques, languages, and even cultural awareness. The goal is to create well-rounded operators who can adapt to any situation. But why did Burkina Faso need such a force? The answer lies in the nature of the threat they face. Traditional military tactics often fall short when dealing with nimble, decentralized insurgent groups. Special forces, with their adaptability and specialized training, are better equipped to handle these complex challenges. Now, let's take a quick tour around the globe and look at some of the world's most renowned Special Forces units. U.S. Navy SEALs. Known for their versatility and infamous Hell Week training, the SEALs have been at the forefront of many high-profile operations, including the raid that eliminated Osama bin Laden. Russian Spetsnaz. Masters of unconventional warfare and close-quarters combat, the Spetsnaz are known for their toughness and ability to operate in extreme conditions. French COS, Commandement des Opérations Spéciales. Experts in African terrain and counterinsurgency, the COS has extensive experience operating in the Sahel region. Israeli Sayeret Matkal, legendary for their intelligence gathering and counter-terrorism operations, this unit is often considered one of the most elite in the world. But here's a thought-provoking question. Could Burkina Faso's new Special Forces unit one day stand shoulder to shoulder with these global elites? What do you think it would take to make that happen? From special forces to national leaders. Now here's an interesting twist in our story. Did you know that many of today's African military leaders, including Ibrahim Traoré himself, have backgrounds in special forces? It's a trend that's raising eyebrows and sparking debates across the continent and beyond. Let's look at a few examples. Ibrahim Traoré. Trained in Burkina Faso's special forces, he quickly rose through the ranks.
Revolutionary salute to our Queen too, back to Revolution for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. I absolutely appreciate the love, Queen. She says, thank you, my brother. No, thank you for your donation and your support. Salute.
His experience in counterinsurgency operations in the north of the country gave him first-hand knowledge of the challenges facing Burkina Faso. Assimi Goïta of Mali, another Special Forces veteran who now leads his nation. Goïta received training from the United States and Germany and led Mali's Special Forces unit before coming to power. Mamadou Doumbouya of Guinea, a former French Foreign Legionnaire with extensive Special Forces experience. He served in Afghanistan, Ivory Coast, and Djibouti before returning to Guinea. This pattern hasn't gone unnoticed. In fact, it's caused quite a stir into the U.S. Congress. Why? Because many of these leaders received training from U.S. military programs. Some lawmakers are now questioning whether these programs are inadvertently training future coupists, as they call them. The International Military Education and Training, IMET program, which has trained thousands of African officers, is now under scrutiny. Critics argue that the program may be inadvertently destabilizing African democracies by providing military leaders with the skills and networks to seize power. But there's another interesting connection. Many of these leaders were also members of their nation's elite presidential guards. It seems that special forces training, combined with proximity to power, creates a potent mix for future leadership. Supporters of these leaders argue that their special forces background equips them with the skills needed to address complex security challenges. They point to the leaders' discipline, strategic thinking, and ability to make tough decisions under pressure. Critics, however, worry about the militarization of politics in Africa. They argue that military solutions alone cannot address the root causes of instability, and that civilian leadership is crucial for long-term development and democracy. What do you think about this trend? Is special forces experience an asset or a liability for national leaders? Share your opinions in the comments. Burkina Faso's Special Forces, the inside story. Now, let's zoom in on the star of our show, Burkina Faso's new Special Forces unit. What makes these warriors tick? How are they selected, trained, and deployed? Recruitment for these elite units is no walk in the park. Candidates must pass a series of grueling physical and mental tests that push them to their limits. Only the strongest, smartest, and most resilient make the cut. The selection process typically includes physical fitness tests. Candidates must demonstrate exceptional endurance, strength, and agility. Mental aptitude assessments, problem-solving skills, spatial awareness, and decision-making under pressure are all evaluated. Psychological screenings, emotional stability, and resilience are crucial for Special Forces operators. Background checks. Candidates must have an impeccable record and demonstrate unwavering loyalty to the nation. Once selected, recruits undergo intensive training that covers everything from advanced combat techniques and survival skills to intelligence gathering and cultural awareness. The goal? To create a force that's as comfortable navigating complex political situations as they are in handling high-tech weaponry. The training regimen includes advanced weapons handling and marksmanship, close quarters combat and urban warfare techniques, survival and evasion tactics in various terrains, parachuting and other insertion methods, intelligence gathering and analysis, language and cultural training specific to the Sahel region, medical training for field operations. But what sets Burkina Faso Special Forces apart is their deep understanding of the local terrain and culture. This isn't just about physical prowess. It's about winning hearts and minds in a complex, multi-ethnic nation. Their missions are as diverse as they are challenging. One day, they might be conducting a precision strike against an insurgent hideout. The next, they could be providing humanitarian aid to a remote village or gathering crucial intelligence on insurgent movements. In the fight against extremists, these special forces have become Burkina Faso's ace in the hole. Their ability to operate in small, agile units allows them to respond quickly to threats and adapt to rapidly changing situations on the ground. Some of their key activities include reconnaissance missions in insurgent-held territories, hostage rescue operations, training and mentoring regular army units, securing critical infrastructure, conducting community outreach in vulnerable areas. But it hasn't all been smooth sailing. Like any new unit, they've faced challenges, from logistical hurdles to the need for specialized equipment. Yet, their impact on the nation's security situation is already being felt. Reports suggest that since the formation of this new unit, there's been a noticeable decrease in insurgent activities in certain areas. More importantly, there's a growing sense of confidence among the Burkinabe people that their government is taking concrete steps to address the security crisis. Here's a question to ponder. How do you think the presence of these special forces will change the dynamics of the conflict in Burkina Faso? Will it be the game changer that Captain Traoré hopes for? The alliance of Sahel states, a united front. But Burkina Faso isn't fighting alone. Enter the alliance of Sahel states, AES, a powerful collaboration between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. This alliance isn't just about political solidarity. It extends to military cooperation, including their special forces. Imagine the combined might of these nations' elite units working together. Joint training exercises, shared intelligence, coordinated operations. It's a force multiplier that's changing the game in the Sahel region. The AES was formed in September 2023 with the signing of the Liptako Gourma Charter. This agreement goes beyond mere military cooperation. It's a comprehensive framework for collaboration in security, economic development, and governance. Key aspects of the AES Special Forces cooperation include joint training programs to share best practices and standardize tactics, intelligence sharing networks to better track and respond to threats, coordinated border control operations to limit insurgent movements, shared logistics and equipment procurement to maximize resources, regular strategic meetings to align objectives and assess progress. This cooperation goes beyond just military tactics. It's about shared experiences, common challenges, and a united vision for a secure and prosperous Sahel. The AES Special Forces are becoming a symbol of African solutions to African problems. But here's where things get really interesting. The formation of the AES and the strengthening of their military capabilities including special forces, is seen by many as a direct challenge to traditional power structures in the region. It's a bold statement of independence and self-reliance. The AES nations are increasingly asserting their sovereignty and rejecting what they see as neo-colonial interference. They're demanding partnerships based on mutual respect and shared interests, rather than the patron-client relationships of the past.
Appreciate the love.
This shift has significant implications for regional dynamics. It's changing the balance of power in West Africa and forcing international partners to reassess their approach to the region. What's your take on this alliance? Is it a step towards greater African unity and independence, or does it risk further complicating regional dynamics? The French connection. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room: France's historical military presence in the Sahel. For years, French special forces played a significant role in counterinsurgency operations across the region. Their expertise and resources were seen as crucial in maintaining stability. Operation Barkhane, launched in 2014, was France's flagship counterterrorism initiative in the Sahel. At its peak, it involved over 5,000 French troops spread across the region. French special forces, particularly the famed COS, Commandement des Opérations Spéciales, were at the forefront of many high-profile operations. But times are changing. In a move that shocked many international observers, the AES nations, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, have asked French forces to leave their territories. It's a decision that's reverberated across Africa and beyond. Why the change of heart? The reasons are complex, but they boil down to a growing desire for true independence and self-determination. Many in these nations felt that the French presence, while ostensibly helpful, was also a form of continued colonial influence. There were also growing frustrations with the effectiveness of French operations. Despite years of intervention, the security situation in many parts of the Sahel continued to deteriorate. This led to questions about whether the French presence was truly serving the interests of the local populations. The French withdrawal hasn't been without its challenges. It's created a temporary security vacuum that the AES nations are working hard to fill. But it's also opened up new opportunities for these countries to take full control of their security destinies. The departure of French forces has necessitated a rapid scaling up of local capabilities. This is where the new emphasis on special forces comes into play. These elite units are seen as key to maintaining operational effectiveness in the absence of French support, and the results show positive outcomes. Some localities in Burkina Faso are reopening schools once closed because of jihadist threats. You could say that Ibrahim Traoré and his special forces are winning hearts back. Burkina Faso's military, a force on the rise. Let's zoom out for a moment and look at the bigger picture of Burkina Faso's military capabilities. Where does this nation of 20 million people stand in terms of military strength in Africa? While not the largest army on the continent, Burkina Faso's military is undergoing a significant transformation. Under Captain Traoré's leadership, there's been a renewed focus on modernizing equipment, improving training, and boosting morale. The army consists of both active duty personnel and a sizable reserve force. But what's truly remarkable is the recent surge in volunteers, ordinary citizens stepping up to defend their nation. It's a testament to the growing sense of national unity in the face of external threats. Burkina Faso's military is organized into several branches. Army, the largest branch responsible for ground operations. Air Force, small but increasingly important for reconnaissance and support operations. National Gendarmerie, a paramilitary force responsible for law enforcement and internal security. Special Forces, the newly formed elite units we've been discussing. While the country is landlocked and thus lacks a navy, it compensates with a focus on mobile, adaptable ground forces. Recent acquisitions have bolstered the nation's military capabilities. New armored vehicles, advanced communication systems, and improved air assets are enhancing the Army's ability to respond to threats across the country's vast territory. Some notable recent acquisitions include Marauder armored personnel carriers from South Africa, Mi-17 and Mi-24 helicopters from Russia, Embraer EMB 314, Super Tucano light attack aircraft from Brazil, various small arms and light weapons from multiple sources. In terms of personnel, Burkina Faso's active military strength is estimated at around 12,000, with an additional 45,000 in reserve. The recent call for volunteers has the potential to significantly increase these numbers. But here's a question to consider. How can Burkina Faso balance the need for a strong military with other pressing national priorities like education and healthcare? What's the right mix for a developing nation facing security challenges? The road ahead, challenges and opportunities. As we wrap up our deep dive into Burkina Faso's special forces and military capabilities, let's look towards the future. What challenges and opportunities lie ahead for Captain Traoré and his fearless defenders? One of the biggest challenges will be sustaining the momentum. Building an elite force is one thing. Maintaining its effectiveness over time is another. This will require ongoing investment in training, equipment, and personnel. There's also the question of balancing military action with political and social solutions. While special forces can be effective in combating insurgents, lasting peace will require addressing the root causes of conflict: poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunity. Other challenges include managing regional dynamics and potential tensions with neighboring countries, ensuring respect for human rights in counterinsurgency operations, preventing the militarization of politics, and maintaining civilian oversight, securing sustainable funding for military modernization efforts. On the opportunity side, Burkina Faso's military transformation could serve as a model for other African nations facing similar challenges. The emphasis on self-reliance and regional cooperation could pave the way for a new era of African security independence. Moreover, as the special forces gain experience and expertise, they could become a valuable asset in regional peacekeeping efforts, further cementing Burkina Faso's role as a stabilizing force in West Africa. Some key opportunities include developing a homegrown defense industry to reduce reliance on foreign equipment, leveraging military expertise to boost national development projects, enhancing Burkina Faso's diplomatic clout through its strengthened military capabilities, creating job opportunities and technical skills, training through military expansion. The success of Burkina Faso's special forces could also inspire a new generation of African military thinking. It's a chance to develop tactics and strategies tailored to African realities, rather than simply importing foreign doctrines. But perhaps the most significant opportunity lies in changing the narrative. For too long, Africa has been seen as a continent in need of external intervention to solve its security challenges. Burkina Faso's bold moves could help shift this perception, showcasing African nations as capable of securing their own territories and protecting their own people. The geopolitical chessboard, Burkina Faso's new alliances. As Burkina Faso strengthens its military capabilities, it's also reshaping its international partnerships. The shift away from traditional Western allies, particularly France, has opened the door to new relationships. Russia, in particular, has been quick to step into the void left by France. There are reports of increased military cooperation between Moscow and Ouagadougou, including arms deals and potential training agreements. Some speculate that Russian private military companies may also be operating in the country, though this remains unconfirmed. China, too, has been expanding its influence in Burkina Faso. While Beijing's involvement is primarily economic, there's potential for future security cooperation. Chinese-made drones have already been spotted in Burkina Faso's arsenal. Turkey is another player making inroads in the Sahel. Known for its advanced drone technology, Turkey could become a significant partner in Burkina Faso's military modernization efforts. These new partnerships raise intriguing questions about the future of international relations in Africa. Are we witnessing the emergence of a new world order, with Africa at its center? How will these shifting alliances impact regional stability and development? The human element, impact on Burkinabe society. While we've focused largely on military and geopolitical aspects, it's crucial to consider the human impact of these developments. How are ordinary Burkinabe citizens affected by the rise of special forces and the changing security landscape? On one hand, there's a palpable sense of pride and hope. Many Burkinabe see the strengthening of their military as a sign of national resurgence. The special forces, in particular, have become a symbol of the country's determination to chart its own course. There are reports of increased public confidence in areas where special forces operate. Citizens feel more secure, and there's a growing willingness to cooperate with security forces in reporting suspicious activities. However, there are also concerns. Some fear that the emphasis on military solutions might divert resources from crucial development needs. The surge in military volunteers has had a significant social impact. It's creating new career paths for young Burkinabe and fostering a sense of national unity. But it also raises questions about the militarization of society, however. It is argued that 50,000 volunteers are not large enough to cause any issue. What are your thoughts on this? How can Burkina Faso balance security needs with social development and human rights concerns? Lessons for Africa, the Burkina Faso model. As we near the end of our exploration, let's consider the broader implications of Burkina Faso's military transformation. What lessons can other African nations draw from this experience? Self-reliance. Burkina Faso's emphasis on building its own capabilities, rather than relying on external support, could inspire similar moves across the continent. Regional cooperation. The AES model demonstrates the power of regional alliances in addressing shared security challenges. Specialization. The focus on special forces shows the importance of developing niche capabilities tailored to specific threats. Adaptive strategy. Burkina Faso's willingness to reassess its security partnerships and try new approaches offers a lesson in strategic flexibility. National unity. The way Burkina Faso has rallied its citizens around the cause of national defense provides insights into building societal resilience. These lessons could shape the future of African security policy. Could we see more African nations following Burkina Faso's lead in asserting their security independence? As we've seen, the story of Ibrahim Traore's special forces is more than just a military tale. It's a narrative of African empowerment, regional cooperation, and the quest for true independence. From the halls of power in Ouagadougou to the dusty battlefields of the Sahel, Burkina Faso's special forces are writing a new chapter in the nation's history. They represent not just a fighting force, but a symbol of national pride and determination. The challenges ahead are significant. Sustaining this momentum, balancing military needs with social development, and navigating complex regional dynamics will require skill, wisdom, and perseverance. But the opportunities are equally immense. Burkina Faso has the chance to become a model of African self-reliance, a beacon of hope for nations struggling with similar security challenges. As we look to the future, key questions remain. Can Burkina Faso's special forces maintain their effectiveness and uphold ethical standards as they expand their operations? How will the shift in international partnerships impact Burkina Faso's development and regional standing? Will the AES alliance evolve into a more comprehensive regional security framework? Can the military gains be translated into lasting peace and development for the Burkinabe people? But what do you think? Will these fearless defenders be the key to bringing peace and stability to Burkina Faso? Or are there other factors that need to be addressed? We want to hear your thoughts. As we sign off, remember that the story of Africa's security is still being written.
Well, over the past few weeks, hundreds of eyewitnesses have now reported seeing large-size UFOs or drones, you can call them whatever you like, hovering for hours, not minutes, over parts of the United States, from Arizona to New Jersey to North Carolina, all across the United States. Many reports that these are hovering over military installations as well. And now we know that the FBI is actively investigating these UFOs. In fact, we just got word that these UFOs are now hovering over federal agents' homes. Listen.
Well, Will, one of the ships was in fact inspected by the Coast Guard and they couldn't find anything. The thing is that there were several other suspicious ships in the region that they never got to. And Will, it gets worse. Just a couple of months earlier, there were several mystery drone flights over our nuclear testing range in Nevada, just north of Las Vegas. And again, nothing was done. And it gets even worse. Some of the FBI agents that have been assigned to look into this have reported drones flying over their homes as if to say, hey, we know where you are.
Well, we wanted to bring in Representative Nancy Mace, who's been outspoken on this issue. She sits on a number of committees in the House of Representatives, the Committee on Oversight and Accountability, Committee on Armed Services, and the Committee on Veterans Affairs. And we wanted to welcome the Congresswoman on the show today. Nice to see you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So given the fact that we've seen a number of these large-scale incursions over the past few weeks, this is alarming. And now we're seeing it in the United Kingdom as well. Do you think the Pentagon, do you think the Biden administration is taking this seriously enough when we now got reports of these things hovering over federal agents' homes? What are you hearing? And what do you want the government to be doing about this?
Well, number one, regardless of the origin of these devices, this technology, these drones, whatever they are, this is a national security issue. And I can tell you, number one, Congress has not been briefed on it. So if the Pentagon or one of the three-letter agencies of the White House is observing these, is investigating them, we are not aware of any of that because we haven't been briefed on it. And when you look at the sites where some of these things are hovering, you really have to question their motive, why they're there, and how big of a national security threat is it, and then who is it? Why haven't they been shot down? Why don't we have these devices in our possession? Maybe we do, but it sure would be nice to know, and I sit on the House Armed Services Committee, it sure would be nice to know that we are watching our back and that we are protecting our nuclear sites or military sites, government sites, et cetera.
And I haven't heard any reports of these being shot down. No eyewitness reports that I've heard from any of our sources. And the same thing in the United Kingdom. We do have video in the United Kingdom of apparently a helicopter incursion with these drones, and they're mimicking the helicopter. I mean, zipping up where the helicopter is trying to take evasive action, they're following and zipping right in the same pattern. If they are from Russia, if they are from China, then where's the mothership? How are large-scale drones just hovering over the United States? They have to return to something. It's shocking to me that you guys haven't been briefed on this. It's alarming.
And who would ever allow this? Like, if it's one of our adversaries, you know, to hell with it. We absolutely should shoot it down. We should know what kind of technology they're using. We should know what kind of data they're collecting on us and our allies. What are we doing about it? And it looks like nothing, just like the Chinese spy balloon. It was allowed to go all over these military and nuclear sites across the country. Finally got shot down off the coast of my home state after it traversed the entire United States, west coast to east coast. And, you know, how can we be taken seriously if we aren't taking our adversaries seriously, if that's what this is?
I mean, my mind also, I always look out for false flags. It's something we cover here on the show to make the American people aware of, you know, trying to deceive us, trick us into believing one thing, that there's a large scale alien invasion right now happening before President Trump takes office to try to bring us all together around martial law or something else. I know that's a big leap, but do you worry about that type of agenda before President Trump takes office on January 20th?
When you look at the PSYOP, basically, that's been done on the American people regarding Trump and the lawfare, nothing would surprise me anymore. These are people that have lied to our face, lied to the faces of every single American, day in and day out, 24/7, 365 days a year. Nothing surprises me anymore.
Are they going to, are you hoping to have a UAP select committee with sort of church style hearings once a month? Maybe I'm projecting, but I would love for you guys in Congress to have once a month, we have these hearings, because each time you hold one of these, we get new revelations about reverse engineering of craft. We have these craft. Now we have biologics. That's an admission on the congressional record now. Yes, we have off-world vehicles. Yes, we have off-world biology. We have beings now in our possession in some capacity or in some research capacity in these deep state programs. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and one of the other things we learned at the last hearing is that we're compensating people for their injuries in some of these crash retrieval programs, which I find very interesting. So if the program doesn't exist, why are we paying people for their injuries incurred during working on the program that doesn't exist? Like none of it, I'm not a mathematician, but it doesn't add up.
Do you hope that we'll have a select committee on this where we'll get these sort of monthly hearings?
I totally support a select committee in that endeavor. There's going to be a U.S. Senate hearing this month, I believe, on UAPs. I believe it's going to be next week. And so I support any kind of transparency, accountability, and disclosure when in a select committee or any other. But also our committees and subcommittees of jurisdiction that do any national security work, we should be holding regular hearings within those subcommittees about this, because to me, it is a national security issue. No matter what if you're a skeptic or a believer, it doesn't matter. It is still a national security issue and should be treated that way.
Talking about these off the books programs, we've been focusing here on the show quite extensively. We've spoken to whistleblowers who've worked at the neutrino base in Antarctica. Of course, it was controlled by these military contractors down there. I think it's been transferred now to Raytheon. And so there's a lot of interest in what's going on in Antarctica. It's out of the United States, so we don't have to talk about it. We don't have to see video footage of it. Is there any concern? Have you talked to any members of Congress, any whistleblowers, anybody that's come forward to talk about concerns about what's been happening down in Antarctica?
One of the rumors that we've heard on the Hill, both in the hearing that I held a few weeks ago and the hearing with David Grush last year, is that the government uses private contractors to skirt the law, to skirt the Constitution, to skirt disclosure, to skirt the requirement to inform members of Congress, White House, et cetera. And so if this is a continuation of that, then it's deeply concerning that it would be happening and that we should call in. I mean, I would love to see us call in the contractors that are allegedly involved and find out what's actually been happening, what's been going on, and who's hiding what from whom and what agencies. Because is this a case where maybe the DOD knows something, FBI or CIA or DNI knows something, and the White House is kept in the dark? Like, where is the strategy here, and who's in charge? Because it's not the people, nor Congress.
Right. Well, I would love to share with you off camera, if you'd like, the whistleblowers who worked at the base in Antarctica.
We would love to hear that, get that information, that data, and protect them by all means necessary.
Are you going to subpoena anyone from the CIA or anyone who might be involved in these deep state programs as part of perhaps a select committee or otherwise?
That is not on the docket yet. I've not heard my colleagues discussing that. But again, I am open to disclosure in any way, shape, or form that we can. You have a right to know how your tax dollars are being used. Even if we can't know every detail to every program for national security reasons, at the very minimum, we should know what programs exist and how that money is being used and who's in charge of it. And when are we getting the report? When are we going to, because we know we've been lied to by the federal government many times over.
I know you've been frustrated with the Pentagon. So here you are in Congress trying to get answers. You're not getting answers on, they were supposed to be moving in parallel with you to be investigating this. Where does that stand from the Pentagon side?
Yeah, well, we had a report come out earlier this year from a federal agency, the Aero agency, looking at UAPs and UFOs and debunking what's real and what's not and all that sort of thing. And they said 0 accounts of UAPs and UFOs are unknown, which is just, it's flat out, it's never going to be 0, because even if you're a skeptic, there's going to be some sensor that malfunctions. You know it's never 0, scientifically, statistically. So you know right off the bat you're being lied to. And of course, I've seen memos now that are declassified between the Pentagon and between the FBI, for example, that several decades ago where they were talking about a crash retrieval program, and the FBI would help the Pentagon, but only if they got access to the crashed craft and share that information, because previously the DOD was hiding it from the FBI. So, we know that there were some agencies that were fighting over who got access to the information and the data. Going back decades. And so it's really important that we have full disclosure, at least with members of Congress, and know where the money's going, because they're spending a lot of money on these programs.
Yeah, that's stunning. And of course, we had the big audit, right, of the.
And they can't pass an audit. Like, they've never passed an audit. 7 audits, they've never passed one.
I mean, if I was running my business that way, I would have been out of, there's just no way I would have been out of business immediately. It's unbelievable to me that we're missing $1 trillion and the American people are supposed to sit there and just sort of take that. It's ridiculous.
It's disgusting. And because they're in charge and they're better than the government, they're better than the people, they get away with it year over year and nothing ever changes. That's why we need full disruption on the Hill with Donald Trump's nominees. We need people to just turn the place upside down, get rid of the bureaucrats, get rid of the bureaucracy, get rid of the establishment, and start over.
I'll get you out of here in a second, Congresswoman, but on what I hear from my audience all the time, and I know just talking to my friends and whistleblowers that I speak to, the biggest frustration is whether it's Lou Elizondo, others, they would love for this information to be able, like photos, videos, to be presented. I would love for Congresswoman Nancy Mace to hold up a giant poster board during one of these hearings and show.
I want an alien body on a gurney. I want the non-human biologics on a gurney and roll it into an oversight hearing. That's what that's what people want to see. We don't have that information. We don't have that evidence. But if it exists, I'm sure as hell going to try to find it.
Yeah, maybe start in Ohio, and the stonewalling members of Congress who want to keep what's hidden at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base hidden from all of us, right? Like start there. I'd love for them to have to bring that forward, but they won't because they're corrupt and they will try to stonewall and keep it from us. I'll get you out of here on this, Congresswoman, which is, how are you feeling about the Trump administration? We talk about transparency. We want these files open. We've heard from President President-elect Trump that he wants these files open, whether it's the JFK files or others. Full transparency. Are you confident that his cabinet appointments and the incoming Trump administration will be able to do that? Or are you seeing deep state forces that are already trying to thwart that?
Well, my thoughts are two-pronged. Number one, I think that Trump has the opportunity and will be the most transparent president in United States history. That's number one. I believe he deeply, based on his public comments, wants that to happen. My second part of that, to answer the question, is that I am deeply concerned about the deep state. We're already seeing Trump's nominees slowly get picked off one by one over in the U.S. Senate, people that don't hold up his agenda, they don't believe in the Trump mandate, and are going to hurt and not allow his nominees to become cabinet members. And so we're seeing that in real time right now. It's disturbing. And I worry about the deep state in Washington, business as usual, the establishment getting in the way of what will be the most successful president in U.S. history.
Well, I certainly hope President Trump is able to come in and be able to release some of these files and be transparent and open. It's just, my concern is that there are all these deep state forces that are in Washington that are actively trying to, they're like leeches, they're like those moray eels, whatever. They're trying to gather and get onto the Trump administration right now and do whatever they can to kind of thwart this. How confident are you that his cabinet appointees will go through?
Well, I'm very nervous about it. He has great appointees. We've already seen one get dispatched by the Senate, and I'm worried about another this week. And I think that they'll do anything that they can to stop him. And we're watching it live. It's one of the reasons he had such a winning mandate in November. People want his nominees, but there's a deep state and establishment that will stop him at all costs.
Congresswoman Nancy Mace, great.
Kofi, follow me.